Call to order the study session for the City Council for the City of Wheat Ridge, Colorado for August 5, 2019. Thank you all for being here. We will start with a citizen comment on any agenda item. And do we have a sign-in sheet? Mr. Goff is going after the sign-in sheet. And this will be an opportunity for citizens to comment on any agenda item. And when I call your name, if you would come to the podium and please adjust the microphone so it is comfortable for you and we can hear you. And if you would give us your first name and last name, and if you'd spell your last name for the record so we get it in correctly, you will have 3 minutes. We will start with Odarka Figlis and Michelle Byer, I believe, on deck.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My name is Odarka Figlus, F as in Frank, I-G-L-U-S, and I would like to yield my time to Carol Matthews.
Okay. Our next speaker is Michelle Byer and Connie Berg on deck.
Hi, I am Michelle Byer. It's B-E-Y-E-R. I live at 11721 West 52nd Avenue in Wheat Ridge, and I am speaking to you about agenda item number 2. Is that what I'm supposed to tell you? Oh. Anyway, first I'd like to say that I thought this had been put to rest from a previous meeting that we had on November 19th, 2018, where council had decided that there would be no improvements east of Tabor Street following into the Haskins station next door to my property. I have paperwork that does say that I will allow the city to put in a footpath through that 90 by 30 piece of vacated land at the end of the street there. But if we are not going to do any improvements from Tabor over to the Haskins station, we're now putting a footpath that dumps pedestrians right into the middle of the street. So it also states that I would be involved in deciding where this path would be. So the south side of that property is the best place to put it. It doesn't involve the drainage from my property or the other homes along 52nd. So the south side would be the best place to put it, but there's 2 huge power poles right in the middle of the path, or what would become the pathway. The other thing that I had discussed with Lauren was that I would like to have a fence put up, which would essentially create a tunnel. So it would be a 4 to 5 foot path with the property owner to the south of me's fence, and then a 4-foot path, and then a fence. But when you come out of that pathway, there's no sidewalk. So you're dumping all these people right onto a street that is not going to be improved. The city's already taken property from the residents at the end of Sims and the end of Tabor to create footpaths and bike paths over to the light rail station right off of Ridge Road. So I don't see that there's any reason to do this. I did speak in length with Lauren about all of this. She came out, she looked at it, she looked at the situation with the utility poles. She was in total agreement with putting the fence up to create a tunnel, but I don't think it's a very safe thing to do. And if we're not going to make a sidewalk from Tabor over to that footpath, it doesn't make any sense to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Connie Berg and Jeff Berg on deck.
Hi, Connie Berg, B-U-R-G, 5195 Swadley Street, Wheat Ridge, Colorado. I'd like to clarify the statement made in the August 5th memorandum to Mr. Goff from Mr. Westberg regarding the 52nd Avenue pedestrian connection. The memo states that a fair amount of interest was expressed by residents of the neighborhood east of Tabor Street in having a pedestrian connection along 52nd Avenue from Tabor Street to Arvada. I believe statements made by residents have been misrepresented by the city. Residents might have stated that they could live with a pedestrian connection or that the pedestrian connection would be okay, but I don't think there's any true interest in creating this connection. The city acquired property from residents along Ridge Road and is spending thousands of dollars to provide a safe, multimodal access to the commuter rail station via Ridge Road. Why would they also want a connection that will drop pedestrians from Arvada's Haskins Station onto a Wheat Ridge Street that isn't even wide enough for 2 cars side by side, let alone pedestrians and bicycles? The G-Line station is located on Ridge Road. The cities of Arvada and Wheat Ridge have both worked to provide safe access to the station via Ridge Road. Residents of Arvada's Haskins Station should utilize the beautiful sidewalks and paths that will be constructed in their subdivision to walk south, where they can join the multimodal path that the city of Wheat Ridge will be constructing along Ridge Road to provide safe access to the G-Line station. Arvada's residents should not be dumped out onto a narrow Wheat Ridge Street that doesn't provide a safe route to the station, especially when there's a safe alternative at the end of the block. Since the G-Line opened for passenger service, we've seen an increase in traffic cutting through the neighborhood to avoid the traffic signal at Tabor Street and Ridge Road. And most of these vehicles don't adhere to the speed limit. They far exceed it. A car speeding through the neighborhood hit a truck parked in front of a house on Sims Place. Increasing the pedestrian and bicycle traffic on 52nd Avenue between Sims Place and Tabor Street by providing a pedestrian connection to Arvada's Haskins Station at 52nd Avenue would be irresponsible and create an additional unsafe condition for pedestrians and bicycles. I can't speak for the entire neighborhood, but I have personally spoken with several of the neighbors who all agree that this connection seems like a bad idea. The memo also mentions access to Drake Middle School. Giving middle schoolers a pedestrian connection from Arvada's Haskins Station to 52nd Avenue, allowing them to bypass a safe route to Drake, is even a worse idea. An expression I find myself using quite frequently is, just because we can doesn't mean we should. I know the city can build this pedestrian connection, but should they? If you choose to vote against the preference of the existing Wheat Ridge neighbors and complete the pedestrian connection from 52nd Avenue to Arvada's Haskins Station, we hope you will seriously consider our previous request to barricade 52nd Avenue east of Tabor Street in order to minimize automobile traffic and maximize the pedestrian and bike safety in the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jeff Berg and Carol Matthews on deck.
Jeff Berg, 5195 Swadley Street. I agree with Shelley and Tony's points, and add that I respectfully request we stop focusing on putting a little footpath to nowhere at this point. We should, in contrast, however, be looking at spending our efforts in building something that will support multimodal and the NRS plan and figure out how to connect bicycle and pedestrian access from the linear path to the Clear Creek Trail. Imagine how many Arvada and Wheat Ridge residents would use this Clear Creek access to get to Clear Creek Crossing and all of the shopping along Youngfield. This would be a path to somewhere.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Carol Matthews, and it looks like Walter on Field Drive is after that, and I'm not going to try the last name.
Okay, I'm speaking on the topic of the NRS, and I was very disappointed that it was approved with so little scrutiny on July 22nd when we're all scheduled for August 5th. Carol Matthews, 3851 Hoyt Street, Wheat Ridge. The central question of an updated neighborhood revitalization strategy is, how can Wheat Ridge maintain its fundamental values and character while managing inevitable change? The NRS report is very disparaging to citizens over 65 of age living in Wheat Ridge. While acknowledging that these people are the majority of the population categories, it identifies education with current standards of earnings and totally disregards the category of skilled tradesmen, of which Wheat Ridge was founded. And these citizens influence the high quality of workmanship and the longevity of the structures. Have you called a plumber or electrician lately? It falsely assumes that if a home is owned by a 65-year-old, that it is outdated and deficient. It states that of the 2,000 houses owned by residents over 65, 80% could become rentals and decrease in value. A few facts here. There's a minimal turnover among 65-year-olds category, and walking the streets, we've found a much higher percentage of blighted houses owned by real estate developers and out-of-area rental companies than those who are owned by seniors. Data not in this report was that a majority of citizens who participated in this study wanted codes enforcement and rental regulations. They favored neighborhood participation in zoning and building codes. 2,000 people have signed a petition against residential zoning being changed to multi-use or PRDs. Chief Brennan and Chief Lawrence have just presented you with a fair and brilliant plan to deal with the rental situation in Wheat Ridge. Spend the $200,000 to $400,000 saved from new city employees for a city improvement fund. The Small Business Group has set a great example for the city investment in small businesses. Copy their lead for a group for community investment. Why wait 2 years to institute change? You have just spent $125,000 for 26 people to conduct community meetings and listen to the people. Why waste another $200,000 to $400,000 to hire city people to listen? That's an oxymoron. Let's listen to the voices who want to participate in inevitable changes in the city. Citizens from Bel Air have volunteered to be the pilot group to develop a neighborhood overlay plan and present it to the City Council study session for a test proposal. Our own Dorothy Archer has spoken to City Council faithfully for more than 4 years. Let her group prepare a plan and present it to Council. Let the neighborhood voices be heard now. Let them present directly to Council. Give citizens the same privilege that you give outside developers. Citizens of Wheat Ridge, the majority population over 65 is vastly unrepresented on City Council. Stand up and take the leadership responsibility that 65 years of life have prepared you for. Run for City Council in November 2019. Preserve Wheat Ridge character and values. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Walter from 4098 Field Drive, and Sandy Nance is on deck.
You didn't try to say my last name?
I'm going to let you tell me how I should pronounce it, sir.
I'm Walter Lamendola. That's Lamendola. I'm at 4098 Field Drive, which is Ed Anderson's old home, for those of you who are interested in history of Wheat Ridge. My comments tonight address the NRS Plan, Chapter 4, the priorities for neighborhood development and improvement. That's page 2 and 3, I think, of your packet. During the NRS study period, we've listened and we have contributed. While listening is always important, what more evidence needs to be gathered? The development of neighborhood plans are supported by 76% of all residents in the survey that was developed. They said there is value to initiatives developed and tailored to individual neighborhoods. Even more clearly, 8 of 10 people surveyed agreed that there is a current need to engage or re-engage neighborhoods on planning and development issues that directly affect them. We need to engage and act now. Changes are happening and need not wait for the results of a separate listening tour. We need to move on to model and implement a neighborhood plan process. The Bel Air neighborhood has at least one neighborhood organization, the Bel Air Improvement Association, which is interested in acting as a convener and catalyst for the development of a model neighborhood process, a plan that can be incorporated into city code as an overlay district of the Wheat Ridge zoning map. Using that process will jumpstart similar processes in other neighborhoods. The neighborhoods are at different levels of engagement and involvement, obviously. National experience with this type of process, the neighborhood planning process, tells us that it could easily take 18 months. In fact, incorporated into many codes in local cities that have adopted this process, the process is laid out as an 18-month process. So the time to start is now. We envision city-provided staff and residents working together to develop such a plan for Bel Air, identifying issues and moving on to implement solutions. Timeliness is important. Development is happening and change is energizing. The energy is sometimes dangerously unfocused and sometimes can even be destructive. There are many in the city, when I quote from the NRS, it says, there are many in the city, even if it's not a clear majority, who are somewhat uncomfortable with the changes that are perceived to be too drastic, out of character, or both. Residents express a desire for the positive connection and engagement with their neighborhoods. The Bel Air example will help empower all Wheat Ridge neighborhoods to participate positively and constructively in the changes they wish to see in their neighborhoods. It'll make Wheat Ridge what we all want. Does the red light mean stop?
It does. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Sandy Nance and Karen Thaler on deck.
Name is Sandy Nance, N-A-N-C-E, 4097 Field Drive. It's been nearly a year since I, as a resident of the Bel Air subdivision, first began trying to tell this city council what kind of development did and didn't fit into my neighborhood. When advised that council would wait for the completion of the NRS, I played nice. I participated in the NRS. The NRS is done. I am not interested in talking anymore. I want action now to create a neighborhood development plan overlay that ensures protection of my neighborhood from future cockeyed developers. And I would like to cede the balance of my time to my neighbor, Professor Walter Lamendula, because I tried to switch that I would go first. That's what those lines meant. May Walter finish?
No, ma'am. Thank you. Karen Thaler and David Thaler on deck.
You said no, ma'am. You said no, ma'am?
Yes, ma'am. I said no, ma'am. What we unfortunately,
Dave Thaler, 6161 West 29th Place, talking about the floodplain. Unfortunately, was not here last week for the meeting, so I'm a little bit ignorant on the whole deal. I guess what it sounds like the meeting wasn't very well either attended and prepared for. Blurry PowerPoints, no pamphlets handed out, nothing at all. So I guess I'm here to ask who I need to talk to more about it, or if I listen to you folks tonight on what we need to do. I'm hearing horror stories of some possibilities of forced flood insurance being forced upon us in the floodplains. As everyone knows, that's a highly expensive insurance that I've looked into before, and it's really not feasible to purchase. I know it's possibly necessary, but not that very, very expensive. So I guess I need to ask if I need to talk to Mr. Westberg or whoever more outside of here, or whatever I need to do to get more information on that. I'm kind of lost on that. I wasn't here at that meeting, so that's.
Mr. Westwood would be your best contact.
Thank you. That's what I need to know then.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Our next speaker is Robert Anderson and Rachel Holteen on deck. Thank you. And Rachel Holteen.
Good evening, Council. My name is Rachel Holteen, and I feel like I should get an extra minute because I thought I'd get his 3 minutes to review my notes. So I'm here tonight to talk about the NRS. It is, as many of you know, I was one of 3 co-chairs and one of 26 people on the steering committee. And we have spent the last year talking to our community, asking them what's important, what needs to change, what needs to stay the same. So yes, we did spend the last 12 months doing a listening tour. And I know it's hard to have a listening tour result in a recommendation for a listening tour. That kind of redundancy actually kind of gets under my skin a little bit, because everyone's always anxious to have something important happen and to take action. And council and a lot of our community advocates actually exercised a lot of patience and understanding during that process and didn't take action on things waiting to find out what the NRS recommended. Well, when the NRS was adopted 2 weeks ago, the recommendation for the neighborhood listening tour wasn't asking the city to hire neighborhood specialists to go ask the same questions that the NRS steering committee asked, but rather to really drill down on the kind of questions that the Bel Air neighbors have been talking about tonight, which is, what are things that are unique to our community that we really care passionately about, that when they are come in direct interface with the city, that we have a framework of decision making that makes sense to us as a unique neighborhood. And that just does not exist in our city right now. And any thought that we could jump out of the gate and have that happen magically across the city is a disservice to the neighborhoods who aren't Bel Air. I actually technically live in Bel Air as it's drawn on the proposed map. And Bel Air has a very organized neighborhood. They actually have an HOA and they've got a water district thing that they have to deal with. Most neighborhoods in the city of Wheat Ridge, we learned, people don't know which neighborhood they live in, and they don't know what kind of issues they grapple with uniquely. So asking the city to adjust how it interacts with its citizens at the neighborhood level, it's not something you can jump out of the gate. Maybe at Bel Air, who spent the last 9 months grappling with a very, very important issue right in their backyard. So they've got organized neighbors, they've been interfacing with the city. They have that vision and infrastructure in place. The majority of people in our city do not have that. They don't know how these decisions are made. And really the listening tour is more about, how do we ask the right questions, how do we get the right answers and ensure our citizens are informed, and how does our city build the capacity to do that in a way that we are proactive and not reactive. And it requires slowing down a little bit. So my blinker's just about up here, but I do want to just suggest, when I was looking at the time frame that is proposed that you guys are discussing tonight, I think it's really important that the council that approves the plan for the listening session is the same council that's going to be part of implementing it, and that we aren't hurrying at the beginning to quick get a job description and quick get out there. It's important to approve the funding for the positions. But as far as what the actual plan is, what we're asking and what we're hoping to get from the listening tour, I think it's important to have the people on board and in place that are going to be implementing that and overseeing it before we decide what it is. So thank you very much for approving the NRS, and I'm looking forward to seeing what's next.
Thank you. That's all the speakers that I have signed up to speak. Is there anyone who has not spoken who would like to speak on any item on the agenda? You may come forward now, please. On the agenda. Okay, we will conclude our public comment and move to agenda item number 1. This is the Neighborhood Revitalization Strategy, the NRS Implementation Work Plan. Mr. Goff, do we have a presentation on this?
We do. Ken Johnston, our Community Development Director, is here, and Lauren Mikulak is also our Planning Manager, is in the audience if you have questions for either. But
Ellie's here as well.
Oh, and sorry, Allison Scheck. But we're pleased to be here tonight to provide you with some recommendations on how to move forward with the recommendations out of the NRS, and I'd like to thank Ken and Lauren and Allie for their work on this year-long process.
Mr. Johnson, please continue.
Thanks, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm pleased to be here to get direction on our plan for implementation of the NRS. As you're well aware, you adopted the NRS by resolution on July 22nd after a year-long process with lots of community involvement, and now it's time to move forward with next steps of implementation. As expected, the NRS, like the 2005 NRS, had many fairly specific, some less specific, but recommendations for an implementation plan. The implementation plan is centered around the four themes, which is building resident capacity to manage neighborhood change, connecting the community by investing in primary corridors, facilitating investment through customer service, and addressing accessory dwelling units. The NRS suggests that those various recommendations represent about a 5 to 10 year work program with roles for staff, city council, and of course the community. In the staff memo that we provided, we've included a series of tables centered around those recommendations with what we believe represents a near-term 1 to 3 year work program with, again, roles for staff, city council, and the community at large. The tables list specific tasks for each of the action items, the timing for those tasks, and who will be responsible. It's not necessarily my intent to go through that whole work plan tonight. We're certainly available to answer questions. That said, I thought I might highlight two of the more significant areas of recommendation, that being the neighborhood engagement tours, which people have spoken to this evening, as well as the 44th Avenue corridor plan. So you'll likely, regarding the former, the neighborhood engagement tours, you'll likely recall that the new program is recommended to be staffed by 2 new professionals who would facilitate that program, and those will be proposed in the 2020 budget, which City Council will start considering in September and October of this year. We think next steps for that program are really beginning to take first steps in terms of getting those position descriptions advertised after the budget is acted upon, creating a general outline of the program, and getting that in front of a city council, and then eventually hiring and onboarding those new professional staff. Because of those logistics, we don't really get out into the neighborhoods on that engagement tour until the second quarter of 2020. And then the second, I guess, more significant effort would be the 44th Avenue corridor plan. City Council actually budgeted for that in 2019, and we have been working on the scoping for it, but resources and workload haven't gotten us quite there yet, but we hope to have that RFP on the street yet this year, and have a contract award is tentatively scheduled for December, with the public launch of that process to begin at the end of the first quarter in 2020. For your information regarding that kind of scope at a high level, we've included several details of what we think will be important inputs in that process and some of the outputs that will be in that eventual sub-area plan. A market study and a traffic study, we think, are 2 of the very important starting points in terms of data inputs, and so that'll clearly be in the scope of work. So that's just a highlight of 2 of the major implementation efforts from the NRS, and again, we look forward to your discussion.
Thank you. We'll open this up then for questions and discussion by council. Ms. Hoppy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and again, thank you to everyone who worked on the NRS, all of our citizens who put all of their time into it. I agree that we do have some neighborhoods like Bel Air that are already ready to, go for it. Some things that I would like to see, and I want to, it's one of those things where it's like hurry up and slow down. I want to make sure that we are walking and chewing gum at the same time. I feel like the presented schedule is a pretty decent schedule. I want to make sure that we don't necessarily come up with a plan without the 2 people already being hired, because I think they should be a part of that process. Some of the things that we're asking them to do, the following roles are organize and facilitate and complete the neighborhood listening tours, be experts in explaining city operations development processes, projects to relate to various neighborhoods, be a resource to communicate between neighborhoods and the city department, help manage special projects including neighborhood plans. So I think that they should be a part of the plan that comes together. But I also, like I said, I want to make sure that we are not taking too much time on this listening tour. Now, we have a few neighborhoods that we could probably focus on to get started, and then we have some neighborhoods that don't really have much organization started yet. And so, you know, by process of elimination, those ones don't come first. The ones who are more organized come first. But I think it's a good plan. And, you know, I, for a long time have said that I think that, and it doesn't say anything specifically about overlay zoning in here, and someone in the citizen comments had mentioned overlay zoning, but I do think that overlay zoning is one way that we could make sure that we're protecting our neighborhoods for the type of neighborhood they are, while at the same time we're making sure that when we have opportunities for development, that those are in appropriate places. And so I think that I like the plan, and I think that I would like to see us moving forward with, you know, with the initial implementation actions.
Ms. Weaver.
I too want to thank the NRS. I haven't actually said that out loud. I know everyone else has thanked them. I completely agree with what Ms. Hoppy just, Councilwoman Hoppy just said. Some of the things that I was thinking about is reading through this is, and what I heard from the neighborhoods tonight was, or the people who spoke, people are ready, but we have this big process. And at least in software development, we usually do some sort of beta test first. And it seems like maybe there might be an opportunity, since we have a neighborhood or possibly two that are ready to have this conversation, that maybe there's a little bit of staff time to start creating what this model might look like with a staff member who's more familiar with Wheat Ridge before passing the baton. And it would also create some good possible training. It would be the listening tour of the listening tour, but in creating a possible model that could then be tested in the short term. And the other piece of that, though, that I also heard was that we have some neighborhoods, which I completely agree with, that are not, you know, the neighborhood I live in, I don't think has the identification of Bel Air. And we don't even really, I don't even have my brain around what the border of my neighborhood is. And I'm also thinking that might be something that a little bit of time could be spent, and maybe that's counselor time with staff time, of just what is the process of helping neighborhoods identify their identity, so that we really can hit the ground running with both testing in a neighborhood that's ready and organized, as well as helping neighborhoods. Because I know that if someone comes to my neighborhood on this engagement tour, I won't even know sort of what neighborhood to identify with, right? Right now, I identify with my district, but not really with a neighborhood. And so maybe those two things, obviously, this is a huge plan that would take a little bit more time, but maybe there's something in the 6-month range that we can activate the things that we're talking about with a little bit and beta test some things so that when those people are hired, they're already hitting the ground. And we're satisfying the two needs that we heard tonight. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Davis.
So I appreciate what Ms. Hoppy and Ms. Weaver just spoke about. I'm a little bit in the middle because I do belong to the Bel Air neighborhood. However, if you ask me, I'd say I live in Melrose Manor. I've got, you know, city blocks. We have a block party, 150 people show up. We're pretty strong knowing we're Melrose Manor, but we're in Belmar. So when I see myself and I say, what, where's Melrose Manor? It's not in here. It's a part of Belmar. So I would say that although we've had some more activity from a group of Belmar residents, as Ms. Hulteen had said, and as I will say, Bel Air is a lot bigger than, you know, that area. So I think that's the hard thing about having a kind of, hey, let's start with a group that's already engaged and going, because I could walk about 6 blocks east and have just as big of a group, as big of as engaged, who, maybe have different situations and different. So I think that's I think the tough part, because we're combining several different neighborhoods that probably might identify themselves in like a smaller little pocket into a bigger Belmar or Bel Air area. And then, of course, I just looked at the one section that's East Wheat Ridge that's really big. So I think that's I think the other thing we would have to discuss is are we set, it looks like, based off of this, we're set on the neighborhoods. I don't know if that's open for discussion or not, but I think the one thing is, although, there's a couple blocks actively engaged right now, I think there's many blocks in that area. So I think that's the hard part about saying, let's start a pilot project. That's my thought on that. And then I guess I want to kind of go to what Mrs. Matthews had commented about. I did think that was interesting about how they just assumed that 65-year-old homes would convert to rentals. I thought that was interesting, but I guess we'd have to talk to the NRS group to why they said that.
If it's based on data, not.
Data.
It wasn't themselves.
Well, okay. Well, but if you read it, it's not based on data. It's kind of forecasting. So they're forecasting that's normally how it goes. Is that what they're forecasting?
They're forecasting based on data that they pulled up from the Jefferson County.
Okay,
records,
so it's
that
kind of
a lot
forecasted data.
A lot of the senior-owned properties have turned into renters.
Okay.
Rentals in Wheat Ridge.
Yeah, and I would say also, coming from parents, one college grad, one not college grad, I guess I did not read that as necessarily bashing people who were not college educated. I think that was more about data, and that who's moving into our city, and not necessarily downplaying or discounting those folks who don't have a college education. So I just wanted to understand that better. But when I read the one about the education, that's just a statistic. It's not necessarily saying all others are not worthy. So I think I do support the coordinators, and I think if there's a way to do it early, I think great, but I think 2 blocks does not make this group. And I will tell you, again, I can pull together strongly and quickly 3 or 4 blocks around me. So, and that's Bel Air, and I'm sure Ms. Hulteen can do the same. So I think that's why it would be nice to kind of have that coordinator, because I'm sure even within that little area, you're going to probably have some disagreeing amongst that. So just my thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate Ms. Weaver's comments. It makes a lot of sense in a way not to jump into hiring staff before we actually have a plan. And I guess point A I would make is, before I'd go for hiring staff, I'd like to know their job descriptions, their salary, their overhead, and most importantly, our exit strategy, not to have staff after they've completed their 2-year mission. The old saying is, nothing approaches eternal earth on life so much as a government committee, and that goes for federal or public staff. This isn't just an opportunity to add 2 more overhead positions to the city. But I'd really like your ideas about, if there is an organization that's out there, perhaps we could do a beta test, and having been a product manager for a software product, I understand that very much. I think the first thing that we have to do, though, is go back and figure out how we're going to define our neighborhoods. And I think we have to have some things in place first before we start getting carried away. For instance, my home is considered by NRS as part of the Anderson Building neighborhood. Well, that's on the other side of the creek, and we have entirely different demographics. So that would be point one, is to find, perhaps, if we have an active group in Bel Air, what really is the commonality borderline for Bel Air. And it may include places like where Christy lives, it may not, but do that first so that we can find kind of a homogeneous area that we actually think is a neighborhood and see what works. That makes a lot of sense, I think, first. And I'm kind of torn about hiring staff to help with this, because I still have a feeling, and I am having a hard time shaking it, that that's what we're here for. That's why they elected us. And perhaps one staff member may be appropriate that's a professional, if such a thing exists, to help give this thing shape and form and substance. But I still believe that the impetus needs to come from council. One of the most exasperating statements I hear is that people don't think that council listens to them. And what better chance for us to change that perception? I mean, we had a lady in here not too many months ago that said, "Oh, I'm just one of the little people, so you're not going to listen to me." I think as council has the responsibility here to participate on this, even though we're part-timers, and not just dump it off on more city staff. And I think defining neighborhoods first is one of the most important things to do. And I have some other points, but I'll yield the floor right now on this particular part of the issue.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to look back and think when we approved the contract for CZB for $213,000, if we'd used that for our listening tour and had been able to get out of that listening tour what we're now seeking to do with a second listening tour, that would have been a more appropriate use of our funds. But even if we had listened to the residents in Bel Air regarding their concerns, based on the way that our code is currently written, it's an administrative subdivision. So we can go out and list it all we want, but if the tools and the code, the way it's written currently, doesn't allow us to react to what we're seeking to listen to, I don't see us making much traction, and we're actually burning an opportunity to work with residents when they come out and say, we want this, and then all of a sudden we say, well, we can't do that because that's not how it's currently written. So with Bel Air specifically, I think we need to be looking at what we can do to deal with that administrative subdivision component of it. But larger regarding the NRS, I'm just concerned that it goes back to the first thing a consultant tells you is to use them again. And I understand CZB isn't necessarily doing this outreach, but their first recommendation is to go out and do what we just paid them to do. And the first question that was asked of CZB is, what does Wheat Ridge want to be? And so as much as I want to see neighborhood engagement, I'm just not keen on hiring additional staff to do that at this time without having that tools in our tool belt to be able to respond to the citizens' concern, going back specifically to the Bel Air issue. We couldn't have responded to that because our administrative subdivision had already occurred. So those are my concerns about that specifically. And then as it relates to traffic studies on 44th, I'd like to ensure that a road diet of any kind is not being considered for 44th Avenue, and that we elucidate that in some way to make sure that we're not going down that same road again. So those are my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dozman?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to echo some of your comments. I love the beta testing. I think that would be a great idea. I also feel strongly that we need to hire at least one staff member as far as having an expert that knows how to go through this process and set a solid foundation. But one of my biggest concerns reading through our study packet this last week has been the timeline. I am very, very frustrated with the hurry up and wait. And I know that that process is lengthy and drawn out for the purpose of being able to listen and hopefully get it right. And for me, I think that we kept saying, well, we're going to wait for the NRS study, we're going to wait for the outcomes, and then we're going to start implementing it. within 2 years from now, we could see a whole lot of development coming into Wheat Ridge. Like, we've seen what the last 2 years has brought to us. And my concern is that if we don't have a solid process and foundation in place, then we're not going to be able to navigate that change and that development in the way that our residents have tasked us with doing. And so having the final plan being adopted in the first and second quarter of 2021, like, I really feel that is much too far down the road. I know that we have budget constraints as far as, needing to hire staff, but when you brought up the beta testing, I said, yeah, that makes sense. And one of my other concerns is also neighborhood boundaries. What constitutes as a neighborhood? What streets does that include, and how do we draw the line as far as, like, if maybe one block thinks a certain way and a block adjacent to them doesn't feel the same, then how are we going to be addressing that? Is it going to be some sort of democratic process? So I think I have a lot of questions as far as what the process looks like, and I realize that we may not have the staffing available at this point in time to do that, but I would really urge us to start moving forward. We have residents that have been coming to council meetings for long periods of time, talking to us, and we need to be able to address a lot of this development that we see coming down the pipeline. And I think that with some of the things that have happened recently, we see that residents are really pushing back. They really want to protect their neighborhoods. They like Wheat Ridge the way Wheat Ridge is. And so we really need to figure out how to manage that change and be able to hear what our citizens want for the future of Wheat Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Goff.
Yeah, just real quickly, I think if staff could go back 6 months in time, we would have struck the words, the term listening tour. It shouldn't have got coined that way, and I think you can, if you read Ken's memo, I think he's actually changed it to neighborhood engagement tour. It's not a 2-year listening tour, it's a 2-year engagement tour where we're listening and doing work. So there could be a lot of things brought to council, and as Mr. Urban's comment and suggestion, if we don't want if we're hearing that we shouldn't do administrative subdivisions, that would be an item that through the listening tour we could bring to council sooner than later for your decision if you want to change that. And same thing with the designation of the neighborhoods. I think we have to hear from people living in those neighborhoods on what those neighborhoods are. And we don't want to do that as staff, right? And we got a foundation, I think, from the original CZB process, but a recommendation on at least nine neighborhoods. But I think those can be fine-tuned, and some of those neighborhoods might not exist at the end of this. It might just be Bel Air wants to be a identified neighborhood, and East Wheat Ridge is fine the way it is, and West Wheat Ridge is fine the way it is. There doesn't have to be these 9 neighborhoods. Those are suggestions, and those, what we hear in the next 2 years and the work that we do over the next 2 years will help dictate, I think, how this comes out in the end. We don't anticipate that we listen for 2 years and then bring a new plan to City Council. We listen and we bring things as we hear them to City Council over the next 2 years.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppe.
Thank you. Yeah, I really see this report as an outline. So it's an outline to writing a novel. And the different chapters are going to be our different neighborhoods. And the plan on how each neighborhood gets designated, or how the lines are drawn, or what exactly happens in that neighborhood, that happens as you're writing the novel. And you have to start with an outline. You have to start with an outline before you write any 5-paragraph essay. So I think that this outline is a good one. I know that we don't currently have the staff to fulfill this. I would like to see it happen sooner. I don't know if we have the money to hire somebody in the 4th quarter of this year to try to get it rolling, and then maybe get another staff member next year. But I agree with the 2 staff. I think that they are part of the process of this is how you're making the bread with the neighbors. And so I really support this and want us to be able to have our communities, our little neighborhoods feel like they have their neighborhood. I don't want Christie's 4 blocks to feel like they're left out from the, from the other Bel Air 4 blocks. Like, they all should be engaged in together. Well, that will definitely take some staff time and planning to pull that together and to get everybody kind of on the same page. So, so again, I really support this. And I don't know if we have the money that we could start something in the fourth quarter. If not, I am going to support 2 positions for next year and for us to start getting this novel written.
Mr. Goff?
Yeah, Ms. Hoppy, that's a good point. This doesn't necessarily have to be aligned with the 2020 budget process. If council wants to move forward in this direction with these recommendations, we can start that process as soon as council appropriates the funding for the 2 staff. We don't have it in the budget. We'd have to appropriate that funding, but that could happen very soon. We still have to finish the writing of the full job description and the recruitment process. So we could start earlier than waiting for the budget to be adopted, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Keeter.
So first of all, to the listening tour, my own recollection of our retreat was that the initial draft of the report actually recommended a more structural approach to the neighborhood question, and it was based on resistance from members of council that they ended up backing off of that, and that the listening tour was a little bit of a way to align what they were getting from the public with what council indicated it was interested in at that time. So at the very least, I don't think there's anything in that report or process that would prevent us from beta testing or in places going straight to a more structured approach. The other thing I wanted to throw in here was 2 weeks ago we went back and forth a bit as to the idea of whether accepting the recommendations specifically on ADUs meant that we weren't necessarily adopting that recommendation of tabling that for 2 years. And I understand the data that the NRS, that the consultants had showing that there wasn't a clear indication as to what direction we should go, but I'm getting a lot of feedback, that's anecdotal, not scientific, but a lot of feedback from people saying they just want us to do something. People just want to know what they can or can't do, and so I guess as part of this, I want to keep in there that I'm generally in favor of the way the discussion has gone tonight, but I think I would be advocating for essentially deciding not to take the recommendation on ADUs and to actually at least begin moving forward on looking into that as a policy.
Ms. Weaver?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we can do, I would love to see us do it all. I do want to see 2 positions. I do think it's prudent to wait for the budget cycle for lots of reasons for 2020. But to go back to what Councilman Matthews was saying, and maybe Patrick and Ken, you can tell me why we couldn't do this, but is there a way that council can roll up their sleeves and go into their districts and help with that identification? You know, I'm remembering from our study session that, you know, we had all of these neighborhoods sort of circled, right? There was some sort of part of the tour where people intuitively circled their neighbor. Not their neighbor, their neighborhood. And I think you're right. I think that some places, like, I don't even know if where I live would end up with a particular neighborhood. But is there things that council could do, even in meeting with their districts and things like that, that could help this process? And I realize that the Bel Air group may not be the exact Bel Air group that ends up being the Bel Air neighborhood. But a beta test isn't really about the final product. It's about testing the questions and the responses and right, like we throw around this word overlay. I'm not sure a lot of people know what overlay planning is. You know, sort of getting that those notions out there. So I guess my question to you all is, could we start these things that, obviously not to step on toes, but to not get in your way with going towards these positions, and that we can contribute, because I agree with everyone. I think we're all feeling and hearing like we need to do something now. People want a response from all of this stuff we've been doing for 2 years. And I know it started out as a listening tour, and I love that it's an engagement tour at this point, because I think that there does need to be more interaction between council, planning, citizens, and I think this might be a great opportunity to start opening up those conversations. So I guess what I'm asking you both is, are we qualified to sort of help out with the initial stages with some guidance of getting this rolling?
There's a question in there somewhere, Mr. Johnstone.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I want it all, clearly.
Okay,
I want it
right.
all.
So,
Mostly
yeah,
an
thanks
answer.
for the question. In answer to the role of council, because it's been discussed by others as well, we certainly see a significant role for council in the neighborhood engagement program in terms of participating in that. As to the geographies, I would certainly agree with, I think, what others have said, which is they're a work in progress. And I think the document itself, the NRS, really acknowledges that this was their best mashup of, dozens of different maps that they got from different people. And I think, frankly, they did a pretty good job. But
I thought it was great, yeah.
But when we go out to the community and they say, well, you didn't get it right, carve off Melrose Manor from Bel Air, that's what the start of the engagement tour is probably all about, right? Is this a good working geography? Or if not, tell us what is. So that would be one of the first steps. As to, council going out and engaging in that, you are free, obviously, to engage your constituents in any manner you see appropriate. We, I think, firmly believe that once we engage on this engagement, it's going to have a pretty significant staff input and be pretty all-consuming for those people. So, I'd be cautious to start the conversation too early, would be my only comment.
Thanks. Thanks for clarifying.
Additional questions, Mr. Matthews?
Well, as this thing's evolved a little bit, I'm still trying to figure out how council plays into this. And certainly, if we haven't even got the neighborhoods defined yet, I think there's a lot of prep work that perhaps could be done by one staff member working in conjunction and partnering with the council members for the different districts. And we could shoulder some of the burden of helping out with that. I just hate to see us jump into two more staff members without having even a plan right now. For instance, 38th Avenue in the Green, the NRS recommends securing funding to implement the adopted 38th Avenue streetscape. I have no idea what that is. Because as I recall, when I was just elected, we had a general election that said people didn't want 3 lanes. They didn't want to narrow 38th Avenue, and we had a big fight for that, and because it was so contentious, we just dropped it. So I have no idea what the adopted 38th Avenue streetscape even is. As another question I have, item 4 here, neighborhood scale retail. Take a proactive approach to neighborhood scale retail at appropriate locations. The whole issue over 38th Avenue was to create a downtown Wheat Ridge where we thought everyone was going to come together in one place. And all of a sudden we've got another plan that says, well, we have to have a place where people can walk to. So we need to have 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 downtowns. And I don't know what that looks like. So I'm not sure we've even figured out what the NRS really told us yet and what direction that takes us before we start hiring too many staff members. Perhaps we need a Saturday, more than just an hour or 2 here, to really figure out what the final NRS draft is really telling us and which way we want to go with it.
Thank you. Mr. Urban.
I guess speaking directly to the 30th Avenue, corridor, it was listed as a priority within this document. The 30th Avenue plan, however, as adopted, doesn't mention anything regarding fixing up the green in front of the school. There are two mentions. One is regarding the use of the school's parking lot for farmers markets and the like. The other mention was regarding the moving of City Hall to the existing property where Stevens is. But as it relates to implementing the 30th Avenue corridor plan, none of that involves spending $900,000 on fixing up the school's property. So I don't think that that's a good use of our resources to do so, and I would like to make a consensus to remove the green development from the current recommendations or from being currently implemented.
There's a call for consensus to remove the green from the plan. Fails. Ms. Hoppe?
I don't know the date, and I'll have to do some research to look it up, but at one point, the City Council did agree to spend $900,000, it's in our budget, to work with the Jefferson County Public Schools on developing that green and having like an outdoor amphitheater and potential water feature and things like that. So it did come in front of City Council. It did get an approval vote. We then did approve the funding for it. So again, I'll have to do some research, and I can, when I find that, I'll let you know. Thank you.
Ms. Davis?
So I'm going to just make a couple quick comments, but because we're all just kind of going around and around. I would agree with Ms. Hoppe, and I think the other thing with that is we could look at it as far as we're spending money to upgrade the school's land, but on the flip side, the school is giving us permission for a lot of our city events to take place there. So, I mean, it's kind of a win-win. Because they're not fencing it off and saying, stay off my property. So I think that that's a perfect relationship and partnership that we've had with that area, and I think a beneficial one to our city. And I think most people who go out there and do yoga or movie on the green and all those kinds of things would probably agree to that. And I think I would agree that we do need to take it slow as far as the planning. And, you know, again, by all means, I don't mean carve out Melrose Manor because it's not big enough to carve out. And someone would say they'd call it Christie's Manor in a little bit. So don't carve out Melrose Manor. But I would say that, I mean, Bel Air is bigger than, you know, the recent controversy based off of this map is kind of my point. And I think that, I mean, if we do a pilot, I think we really need to be very intentional on that. I don't support it, but we need to be very intentional because it does include a larger group, and it kind of goes back to the planning that we still need to create. That would be kind of a job description and a plan of what exactly are we going out there and doing initially. Are we going out, and the first thing we do is kind of define neighborhoods. Do people associate themselves with an already predetermined neighborhood that their few blocks have created and have that group? So again, I think, of course, it comes with a job description and kind of a plan of step one, step two, which I know this is a part of, but this is kind of just a big umbrella over what we need to, you know, create the chapters and the words. So that's it.
Thank you. Ms. Hoppe?
Yeah, with that being said, I'm going to try to find a consensus. I'd like to ask for a consensus to adopt the neighborhood revitalization strategy implementation work plan and ask staff to potentially find, if they can find the funding, to hire at least one part-time, if not full-time position for the fourth quarter of 2019 to start working towards the actions and next steps.
Question. Could we pull out the tabling the ADUs as a separate question? It's not in the calendar, but or at least clarify that the fact that it's not in the implementation calendar or schedule isn't an affirmative decision by us to not do anything for 2 years?
Sure, and say that because we do have existing ADUs that we need to deal with currently, and to also say that addressing the accessory dwelling units will not necessarily, although is not on the current 2-year plan, could potentially end up on the 2-year plan, should council choose to add it. Does that cover it?
Is that part of the consensus?
I'm
about
asking that,
the
yeah.
ADU part? Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so there's a consensus out there? Everybody, okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4 in favor. So that's a majority, not really a consensus, but, that is a majority of the opinion at this point. Ms. Davis, did you have another comment?
I just have a question on, for those who aren't, is there something that they would like to tweak a little bit that, we can work on tweaking a bit to make you more comfortable?
I think, there again, we're going ahead with making plans to hire staff. I don't think we have a really solid plan yet on what we're trying to accomplish before we start spending money. That's the thing that concerns me, is this kind of pie in the sky right now. I mean, like I said, it just seems to me we just haven't figured out enough yet to start. I mean, this is really could be a major transformation of our city. And before we start heading in a direction where all of a sudden we find ourselves trapped on a path with no U-turns available, I'm just not sure I'm ready to do that.
Mr. Goff, would you reply to that?
Yeah, I would respond to that. And I understand what Mr. Matthews is saying, but really without staff, we don't have enough resources in-house to provide enough dedication to this to help make this report more detailed. We really need staff to help with that process so that we can intermittently come back to council and say, is this the direction you want to keep going? It's not, we're going to hire staff and then just go do a bunch of work without talking to council. It's to massage this draft that Ken and staff put together and continuing to define it further on what you guys want and what the community wants. And we don't have the staff in-house to do that. We could put it in our work plan, but that would push us out 2, 3, 4 years. If you haven't noticed, the city is very busy with a lot of land use plans that come through. Staff is doing more than just what city council directs us to do. We have to review and process tons of permits and plans that come across our desk daily. So that's what we try to work on and get done. Adding something like this is something on top of our current work plans. I don't know if that helps Larry or not, but.
Mr. Matthews?
I think I would categorize my position as cautionary, and since this is a consensus, this still has to go before a vote at a council meeting in order, if we're going to approve some budget for 2019. I think we have a chance there to clarify some of these questions, and maybe staff will have to work a little overtime to try and management will have to clarify some of these and what our goal is going to be with this first hire before we approve it, an approved budget for it.
That's some of the information we would like tonight, so if we have more time, I mean, if we're not comfortable with that, that's what a work session is for, not necessarily a business meeting, but maybe Ken has something to add to that.
Mr. Johnson?
Yeah, just maybe if we could look at page 2, which is the implementation table speaking to the neighborhood engagement tour. So just to dive into that, because I think it aligns with some of the things that Mr. Matthews and others have said. So we're going to draft those position descriptions really just starting right now. We've already been pulled. We have a half dozen different examples from other communities, and obviously include those new position requests in the 2020 budget. I think it was Ms. Hoppy that said she'd want the existing or the new staff to have a role in refining the nature of the program, and we agree. So number 2 on the line there is draft outline of a neighborhood engagement strategy September, October of this year, present that draft of a neighborhood engagement strategy to City Council for approval November, December. So we want to get that in front of you as well. It's just a process to get there, with this being the first step in that process. And then if you go down a few lines, after we would then hire and onboard the new neighborhood engagement staff in the first quarter of 2020, and then they would get an opportunity to refine that neighborhood engagement program so they have really some buy-in to a program that they're going to be administering. So just kind of a highlight of what the next steps are, and the fact that council will have opportunity for further input along the way.
Ms. Hoppy?
Well, I believe that we have not had a public works director for quite some time now, and the city manager has been our acting public works director, so he's been wearing those two hats. So I think that we've probably saved some money there in our budget.
You want to respond to that, Mr. Goff? If you've got two hats, do you have two heads?
Actually, I've been acting police chief and acting Parks and Rec director. Slowly getting rid of some of those hats, but we could find the money in this year's budget if that's what council chooses or asks us to do. Increasing our FTE count, though, is a council action that we like council to make that decision. If we're going to increase our staffing level by 1, that's an action that we would bring back to council. We can find the funding potentially in this year's budget, so you wouldn't have to approve that, but the increase of staffing would be needed to be approved.
Ms. Davis and then Ms. Hoppy.
So just a quick check-in, though. I mean, you got a short time frame between now and 2020, honestly. I mean, I think by the time you draft a job description, it sounds like it's going to have to be a pretty unique individual.
Yeah, I don't know if we can get anybody hired by fourth quarter of this year, honestly.
Yeah, but I mean, at
August.
least we could start it to that. They would start maybe right in January kind of thing.
Yeah, they could get started maybe a couple of months earlier instead of March.
Instead of March or May or something.
I'll go to Mr. Matthews.
And just since we're getting close to November too, just a reminder, we're kind of a lame duck, at least that's what they call it at the federal level, lame duck session right now, so. Yeah, well, potentially me if I don't get reelected. So I'm just saying that, before we get too carried away too, that things could change drastically on November 8th, which is not that far away. So I'm saying proceed with caution, and then I understand what you're saying, Mr. Johnstone, and we'd like to see more information. I think that'd be very helpful for the way this kind of fleshes out. And so that's why I'm saying, because I voted no here, but because it's a consensus, it's not binding yet, and I think you have some direction and you've seen what our concerns are, that you can proceed to try and satisfy some of those concerns in the meantime.
Mr. Urban?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of my lingering concerns regarding this specifically is regarding the 30th Avenue corridor plan and the recommendation to implement that, which that's the recommendation, implement it. But as that 30th Avenue corridor plan stands, one of the recommendations in that plan is to create a Wadsworth Town Center sub-district or sub-area plan for the Wadsworth Town Center area, and that area is generally from, 35th to 44th or 48th, that area. And so what I'd like to see us do is, because the Wadsworth Boulevard and 38th are both on our priority list, is to have a consensus that city staff work towards developing a sub-area plan for the Wadsworth Town Center area, because that is within our purview of the NRS recommendations, and that would give us guidance as it relates to not only widening Wadsworth, but what's going to happen on the sides of Wadsworth. And I think that would be beneficial to implement this plan. So what does everybody think about that?
Ms. Hoppy?
Well, I just would like to know what the staff's opinion is on that, if that's something that they've already been discussing, or if that's something that, because those two areas do touch, so it's like left hand, right hand.
You can start.
We do have a Wadsworth sub-area plan, albeit it's a few years old, right? I think it's from 2006. I think And then we've since done Envision Wheat Ridge, the citywide comprehensive plan, which really, I think, mimics some of the same thoughts of doing, slightly higher denser mixed-use development along that corridor. As it pertains to the street design, I mean, we're going to have a final design for that street. Mark is in the audience here, but really within the next couple of months. I mean, essentially, we have a final design. So I'm not sure that's subject to a lot of change at this point. In terms of the 38th Avenue corridor plan, I know what it recommended, I think, was to emphasize the synergy between what's happening on Wadsworth and 38th, and really look at that whole area as our downtown, right? With 38th being the main street, Wadsworth being of a different character, but adding commercial and mixed-use densities. After we adopted the sub-area plan, we very consciously created the mixed-use zoning districts for Wadsworth Boulevard and others, and then City Council proactively rezoned in cooperation with the property owners, both of those corridors. So while I'm sure there's more work that we could do on Wadsworth, I'm not sure a full-blown sub-area plan would necessarily be warranted at this time, but we're open to your direction.
Do we have some additional discussion then on agenda item number 1, or do we think we've pretty well got it?
Ms. Hoppy just asked
Okay.
you to repeat, and so what I'd like to see us do is to implement, not implement, but craft a Wadsworth Town Center sub-area plan as it relates to the 38th Avenue corridor plan, which calls for this sub-district, which is the Wadsworth Town Center area, and coming up with a plan regarding what is our hope for that area.
So consensus on developing a Wadsworth corridor plan in conjunction with the 38th Avenue plan? Do we have consensus on that? Thank you.
That will take funding, and then also time. As you know, with 44th Avenue.
You just assured us you could come up with dollars.
Well, potentially. You have to approve to spend them still. We have our number one priority is, well, it's already budgeted, is the 44th Avenue corridor plan, so that's probably going to be the next couple year process. So just so council understands that an additional sub-area plan is not going to be on the radar anytime soon, unless you want to give us more planning staff or hire a consultant to do it. But that hiring a consultant still means you have staff involved in that. So it's just not possible, Mr. Urban. I'm sorry to do.
I understand that, but how is this any more or less specific than the other recommendations that have been brought forward? It's as on equal footing as these other ones that have been made. So it's something that council wants to see done. I understand the staffing part of it is there, but we haven't been asked to tie money to any of the other recommendations being made. So
I'm just telling you that we can do it. It just won't happen in the next year or two. I just want to make sure council understands that. I mean, if you want us to, if you want to change your consensus to say this has to be the number one priority and it has to get done in the next year, we're going to have to put off the 44th Avenue sub-area plan, which is totally your decision. But I just want to make sure that's clear. We can't do two of those at the same time.
Mr. Matthews?
According to this document, we're supposed to see scope of work that would hit the street in the third quarter of 2019 for 44th Avenue, and we have $150,000 in the budget for that. Where are we at on that?
That's correct.
You said it earlier. You said that they're working on it.
Okay, so is it going to hit the street in third quarter? So that'd be next month.
That's our intent, yes.
Okay, well, that would maybe help us give us, and so if that's complete.
Well, then there's a process, then you actually have to do it. That's just to hire somebody. We're hiring a consultant firm to help us with that, and then it's probably a year-long process to do that study, to reach out to the neighborhoods.
I mean, are you talking about you have to hire someone for 44th or for Wadsworth? Did we switch
44th.
So do we have a plan or not? I'm sorry, I got lost in.
44th, we don't have we have a current Fruitdale sub-area plan, which is includes part of 44th, but the NRS has recommended that we do a sub-area plan for 44th from Wadsworth to Youngfield, and that's what we're working on. We're going to bring that back to City Council.
Okay, and there was $150,000 budgeted in 2019 from Youngfield to Wadsworth.
Yes.
And where have we spent that $150,000?
We haven't.
We have, staff has drafted a scope of work, and we're ready to put that on the street. Yet, I think is October the timeframe? And then the table, there's a table in here regarding that project as well, but we're scheduled to award a contract in December of this year, so council would award a consultant contract in December of this year. And then for some internal staffing reasons, in terms of some people being out of the office on leave, we're kicking it off probably around March of 2020. And yes, to Patrick's point, we anticipate that to be about a year-long process.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Ms. Hoppy?
Oh, I just wanted to, for those that might be out in TV land following around, page 4 has the implementation actions and next steps on the 44th Avenue. So.
Thank you. Additional discussion on item number 1. We ready to move on to item number 2? Okay. Thank you. We will move to agenda item number 2. This is the Wheat Ridge Ward TOD, Transit-Oriented Development, right? 52nd Avenue Pedestrian Crossing. And Mr. Goff, do we have a presentation
We do.
on this?
Mr.
We've got a...
Mr. Mark Westberg here. Steve
Okay.
Wynn is also here, our engineering manager.
Thank you.
Just waiting for the bulb to warm up. So I can make some introductory comments while everything's warming up here. We have brought this back to you. We heard very loud and clear that we're not connecting a street the last time we talked about 52nd Avenue east of Tabor Street, and we're following that direction. But when we had our neighborhood meeting in general about the streets in this area earlier this year, there was some interest expressed by the neighborhood east of Tabor Street to have a connection, a pedestrian connection up into what is going to be Haskins Station in the future. And so I'm just going to walk through some slides really quickly with you all to sort of talk about what some of those neighbors expressed and what we talked about with them. So this is 52nd Avenue east of Tabor Street. Currently we have right-of-way, 35 feet of right-of-way between Tabor and Sims, and then we have 5 feet of right-of-way east of Sims. And then the 30 feet of right-of-way that was vacated back in 20 years ago or 25 years ago or so is that part that's in blue. And that agreement does have a caveat or a clause in there that talks about allowing, no streets, but allowing a pedestrian connection to be done there. So from the agreement standpoint, this is something that's in place right now today. And again, we wouldn't have brought this up except we did have some interest expressed by some of the folks in that neighborhood south of 52nd to be able to connect in. So the potential destinations for this connection, and this map is really busy, the sort of orangey browny area there is Haskins Station. What's that? Oh, I can do that. This is Haskins Station over here. This is Tabor Street. So this is the city boundary here. This is that piece of 52nd we're talking about. Ward Road is over here, and then this is the Toll Brothers development. I believe it's called the Ridge at the Ward Station. This is the RTD parking lot. This is where the Hans Ranch townhomes are going in, and then this is where the actual tracks are. So the potential destinations that people might use on either side of the line is Drake Middle School is over here. The G-Line station is down here. Haskins Station is here. And then Haskins is going to be building a connection to the Van Bibber Trail down the ridge that they've got. We all have ridges. The ridge they've got goes down to the Van Bibber Trail and provides that connection to that trail system they've got. It's not as good as ours, granted, but it's still a pretty good trail system. Clear Creek's better. And so this is where that potential pedestrian connection would be made. So I flashed this up. This is our street network map that we've been using for a while now. And again, it shows where Drake Middle School is over here. This is the stoplight that's at 52nd and Ward. The G-Line station's down here. This is all Haskins Station. I stole their site plan off their the city's website and plugged it in here. I'm sure they're fine with it. And the Van Bibber Trail connection is back here. So this is where Haskins is planned. This is where the big overhead power lines are. So they're proposing that to all be open space because Excel said, thou shalt not put stuff under our lines. And so they didn't. They've also got some interior open space planned in the middle. They've got quite a bit up here at the north end where there's a lot of topography. And then this little white line, which is going to be hard for y'all to see from there, is where that connection goes down to the Van Bibber Trail, which goes over the Stinger, I think it's Stinger soccer complex and all those things. So this provides a real connection for the folks on this side to get over there. Right now, it's difficult to get there because there's a ridge that runs along here, and then Ward Road is not a really friendly place to walk. So again, that connection would be at this location on this map. So our question for you today is just, do you guys want us to pursue this? We've done nothing on this. We haven't really even thought about what side of 52nd this is, how big it is, how wide it is. We did meet with the property owner that was part of that annexation agreement and sort of talk about her use of that area, because they do use that 30 feet of vacated right-of-way as part of their landscape storage business. So we sort of talked through some of those issues and those kind of things. But we've got a lot of work to do. But before we do anything else, we want to come to council and just ask you if there is any kind of consensus to move forward with in exploring this option. It doesn't say it will happen. We're just going to see what could be done, where it could be done, how much it would cost, and all those kind of things. In the staff report, we also talked about, and I think it was a great idea from the property owner that was a part of the annexation agreement, was that this doesn't get built until Haskins reaches some kind of critical mass, if you will, that there's enough people over there to warrant having that connection to get over to Drake or down to the G line station, and there's enough connection, there's enough stuff built over there that people on our side of the line would actually be able to get to the Van Bever Trail. There's no point in putting this pedestrian connection today, because it would be a peg connection nowhere today. So our thought would be is that we'd approach Arvada. We've had conversations with them about, what timing might look like and different things like that. So that's just and I'll just throw the grenade out in the room here and let you guys talk amongst yourselves about it, and we can answer questions if you have any, and I can flash back to some of the maps, but it's just a question of, do we want to look at this as an option?
Okay, Mr. Westberg has got a grenade on the table. Let's go for it. Okay, we'll start with Mr. Urban.
I'll throw it right back. So in the November 19th study session, the council made the consensus not to move forward with any improvements on 52nd east of Tabor.
Yes.
And then now we're talking about potentially building a pedestrian access when and if there's enough demand for it in the future.
Yes.
So what kind of consensus are we seeking here tonight?
So our thought is that since we've got SEH on board, our design consultant for all the streets and stuff we're building elsewhere out there, is that we've got them on board. They've already surveyed this area when we thought we might be building a street through there. And so it'd be relatively easy for us to go ahead and get the thing designed today and just have it sitting on the shelf to wait for some future date when Arvada says, yeah, we think there's enough stuff, or we decide that we think there's enough stuff. Council could decide at that point there's enough stuff. So today's decision is not let's build it, it's just let's explore the option or not. That's the consensus we're asking for.
Ms. Hoppe? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Urban, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, I guess one of my other concerns, and I brought this up on a previous request, is getting the city attorney's determination that this particular improvement is within the quote-unquote jurisdiction of the 2E funds with regard to how far apart this is from that. And I don't know what the rule needs to be, or how close a project needs to be to that area for it to count, but that would be a lingering question I have as well.
We can certainly ask that. Our thought is it's an extension of the improvements that are being done on the rest of 52nd, so that's the tie-in. It's not nearly as remote as that other proposal we brought to you earlier, and we totally agreed. Thanks for bringing that up before, that piece of ridge probably isn't 2E eligible. We think this is. If it's not, then we can proceed accordingly. We can certainly ask the city attorney that question.
Thank you, Ms. Hoppe.
One of the concerns of the citizens earlier was that people would come down this path and that there would then be no other improvements on Tabor, so then there wouldn't be sidewalks or anything like that. So would that be a part of the plan, the path, and then improvements to the street of Tabor, maybe some traffic calming for the quick vehicles and connecting sidewalks and things like that? Would that be part of the plan?
So certainly it could be. What we'd envision is just a sidewalk connection from Tabor Street over to our city boundary built at some point in the future. Certainly if there are speeding issues up there, we have our neighborhood traffic management program that we can implement on 52nd. It's a local street today. It's designed that way and built that way. It's not designated as a collector street. I believe we have speed bumps already on those north-south streets through there that are sort of left over, if you will, from the RTD project when they were building the Tabor Ridge intersection. People had to detour through those neighborhoods, and so we had RTD put speed bumps in there, and those are still there today. So there is some traffic calming for the north-south. Certainly if the folks on 52nd want to explore something for 52nd, we can do that. Our experience is if you if we have a sidewalk and there's a bunch of peds walking on that street, that also tends to slow people down. It just, feels like, oh, there's stuff happening here. We should drive slower. So we can certainly, the scope of what we look into is completely up to council at this point.
Thank you. Mr. Matthews?
Yeah, forgive me, I'm getting cataract surgery on the 27th, and I'll be able to see your screen the next time, so I'm going to ask a silly question. I couldn't tell from what you had up there. What is Arvada building up to the city boundary?
So Arvada's plan right now, and part of it's because they need it almost all the way to the city boundary, is a complete street. So bike lanes, 2 lanes of traffic. So we can try to flash that up for those of you that will be able to see it. So what they're building is they're building a street right up to the city boundary, just short of that city boundary, because they've got some driveways going into what was originally proposed to be some kind of a multifamily district down here. It's right now it's blank on their maps. Their development plans don't show what goes into this area, but they've got a street connection as far. Is my mouse still there? They have a street connection as far west as this, and they've decided to go ahead and have the developer build right up to here. So we would have a sidewalk to connect right into with this connection when it's done at some point in the future.
Okay, so if we have a 5-foot easement that already exists
Yes.
along the south side, if you will,
Right.
of 52nd,
Right.
what are we talking about? And what's,
Well, again, we haven't explored, we don't know, if that 5 feet's wide enough, what the situation is. And when we met with the property owner out there are some utility poles right along the south side of the property that she's got control over. And, so it's possible we might be able to fit something at 7 feet wide in there. She would definitely like to have a fence between whatever that PED connection is and the rest of her property, which she thinks is a great idea, because a lot of her stuff's big, but there is some stuff that's able to be picked up and thrown around and stuff. We don't want people just randomly wandering through her space. So it might be that the fence moves 2 feet north or something like that. Again, we just haven't really looked at this much.
and I'm not in a position to really make a decision on this until I know what your definition of what this access is going to look for. And I give you the example at the end of 39th Street at Independence Court and Hoyt Court. There's about a 4-foot wide walkway.
Right.
And it's between two houses. It's where 39th would go if it was extended through, but it's only about this wide. And the kids walk the heck out of that to get over to Everett School, and I walk the heck out of it to go down to the Greenbelt. And if that's all you're looking for, it looks like we have plenty of easement already, and I'm not sure.
Well, and that's the question, Mr. Matthews, is
What
do you want us to even try to even look at starting a design that we can bring back to you before anything's constructed? Or are you totally against any connection, and if it can end tonight? So that's...
Well, that would be my opinion, is that if this is some future deal, because we don't know what the need is going to be and what have you, perhaps we're premature. I mean, I don't know what I would be giving you consensus for right now.
That would be
and I'd
it.
hate to design something without
That would be it. Don't design
knowing
anything.
it's needed.
That would be the consensus.
Mr. Keeter?
Mr. Westbrook, are there any obstacles along that stretch right now that would prevent this from becoming a desire line, makeshift access if we did nothing?
So if nothing is done and the fence and the 30-foot remains fenced, right now the 5 feet that's there, that's our right-of-way, is in the neighbor to the south's yard. So we, of course, have to have a conversation with him at some point about moving fences and doing different things, and that's in the plan to do if we decide to move forward with this. And so we really haven't, again, whether it goes on the south side of 52nd, the north side of 52nd, we haven't looked at that much. We've sort of looked at it and thought, yeah, there's 35 feet of right-of-way. The existing road's about 20 feet wide. We can probably figure out, where to put that in. But we don't want to move forward with anything because this was a big deal about putting a street that we want to make sure that council was okay with us even exploring this idea, which is really all we're asking for today is, can we explore this being a PEG connection that doesn't get built right away? Maybe it does get built right away, but that's really up to where we land on this with council.
Ms. Weaver?
How much does it cost to explore?
I would check with our consultant and see how much that would cost. My guess is it might fit within their existing contract. Their existing contract was to design the street east of Tabor Street, but we can certainly ask them that question. Yeah, we can fold this in with what we've got. There's no additional contracts with the city. We would just need to look at it and see what's going on. And we could just have them put together 30% plans and do a little bit of look at it and then bring those back to council and touch base with you again at that point. We don't have to get them completely done. We can certainly touch base as we go along.
Ms. Hoppy?
So as I understand it, because they have already surveyed the area, they have already done all the measurements, they've already staked out all of the, this is where power lines are, this is where water lines are, the whole bit, because initially we were looking at a street, we said no to the street. Because all of that work's already been done, and that this may come up at a point necessary to connect communities, that what you're asking is, should we look at asking for a 30% plan and asking our consultants how much it would cost, and then coming back to us with that? That's what you're asking?
That can be, absolutely, that can be what we do.
Mr. Urban?
I guess, just to be clear, what work has been done on this project? Because you indicated a lot of surveying and other work. But
We surveyed this entire corridor from the city boundary all the way to Ward Road, because we had surveyors out there, and so we had them go ahead and pick everything up that was out there. Because we needed to know what was going on to the east of Tabor Street, even if we didn't build a street, for drainage reasons and things like that, and to figure out where utilities are and all that stuff. So it's all been surveyed, but that's all that's been done. We just surveyed everything, back whenever it was we did that earlier this year.
okay, I would like to make a consensus that we not move forward with this pedestrian connection at this time, and you're welcome to bring it back up at whatever time that it's deemed necessary, but I think at this time we should postpone this indefinitely.
On the consensus, 1, 2.
I have a question.
A question of, go ahead, Ms.
So I guess my clarification is, when you say move forward, all we're doing is including it into a plan that they're working on, correct? It's not that we're actually developing it. So if we oh lordy, people are wearing their own little path in the dirt there because there's a lot of traffic going there. It's just to say, hey, if there was ever a need for this, this would be the plan, correct? We're not really authorizing it to be done. We're just authorizing that if, like you were saying, I agree that if we find a need for it in 5 years or 7 years when things are built up and that there's a need, that we could possibly go back to this plan and know what it would look like.
We don't know what the time frame would be. I know that Haskins is moving forward in Arvada. I'm not sure exactly where they are in their process, but they seem like they're wrapping up, and because they've got construction drawings in for review and all that kind of stuff. So they could be starting construction. And I've not seen a phasing plan for what they want to do. Presumably Arvada's going to have them start building streets right away. So again, we can check on that and see where their schedule is and see what we want to do. We thought we had I'm an opportunist. You guys know that. We had an opportunity. We have a consultant on board that's already got all the survey done. What if we produce a 30% drawing that shows where this thing might be and where it makes the most sense to be? We can float that out with the neighborhood, talk with the property owner there and run that around, come back to council and say, here's what we found. And if you guys say, we just don't like any of this at all, throw it away. If you say, let's do it, but let's think about where this fits in the schedule with what Haskins is doing. And I don't know that Haskins has a construction schedule yet. So we were here and thought we'd ask the question.
I think to honor Mr. Urban's consensus, we should move on. We should
Move to the consensus?
We should move to the consensus because we had an interruption by Ms. Davis with a question, and now we've had a response from Mr. Westberg, but I believe we should go back to the consensus that Mr. Urban's going to offer, which was to postpone any design work. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, but we're still allowed to have discussion on the consensus, aren't we?
Yes.
Okay, well, my question was to clarify, even though there's a lot of stuff, and I'm looking at, pardon me, but I'm legally blind in my left eye, so I'm trying to bear with you, but isn't that, you said there was a no development zone yet, a blank spot in there that actually showed stuff but isn't going to happen yet? And do we really know what's happening on the other side of the property line?
So this is where the high power lines are, and Excel has I believe it's a 200-foot or 100-foot wide easement for those power lines that come from the substation that's right here. Those go north, okay? And so in that zone, they've got all that. Excel said no houses in that zone, which makes a lot of sense. You don't want to have, you've got to drop on those power lines. You don't want to have a house in the way. So that's an open space area that they've got under there. So they've got this wide open space area that runs up through there, and they've got a couple of things planned. They're going to put their detention pond in.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought you were pointing to the southwest corner of the property.
Oh, this area down here. This was the area that was most controversial because it was originally planned to be apartments. It was going to be all apartments down there. And so as it was going through the Arvada process, and this was the area that was reserved by the current property owner. He wanted to develop this corner. He was going to let Richmond Homes develop the rest of this stuff. and he wanted to put apartments in there. That was very controversial, and Richmond was getting hung up on that. And so what they did is they basically showed that as a blank spot on their final development plan for the rest of Haskins Station, and it says future development.
That was my point. We
Yes.
don't know what's going in
We
there.
don't know what's going in there yet.
So that could generate 5 people of traffic or 5,000. We just don't know.
Well, and again, our thought is it's all of these other houses. You know, right now the count was over 400 for everything here. We think those folks might have some kids that want to walk to Drake Middle School, and this would be the most direct route. And so that's the reason. And again, this wasn't something staff thought of. This was something our residents in this neighborhood brought up during the neighborhood meetings and said, you know, we would like to have a connection over to Haskins so we can get up into all the stuff they're doing, because they've seen Haskins plans. They want to be able to go over there. So that's the reason we brought this back to council, is we told them we'd come see council about it and we'd report back to them.
Ms. Hoppy?
So can I just clarify that we could potentially have 30% plans for free? I mean,
Well, it'll cost, but it wouldn't be an additional contract or money over the contract. And I'll ask, if they say, no, it's additional, we're gonna charge 30 grand for these, then we'll come back to council and say, hey, do you want to spend 30 grand doing this?
so we could say you could go on with a 30% plan as long as it's not going to cost us additional money.
You're right. There'd be no additional contracts drawn up, yes.
Mr. Urban?
I guess even though there's no additional money being spent, the time on the contract spent designing designs we don't need would be time not spent on other designs we may need. Is that possible?
You know, the consultants are doing this. They can pull whatever resources in they need to pull us off. If we explore this connection, it wouldn't impact the schedule we've got on anything else we've got going on up there right now.
So I'll reiterate the consensus to postpone this pedestrian connection indefinitely.
We have 3-4, so that would not be a consensus. Ms. Weaver, did you have something? Okay. Okay. Ms. Dozman?
So I'm not sure whether the need for this is deriving from our citizenry or if it's being derived from our VADA. Like, I mean, I understand, but like we said no to the connection for the street, and yet here we are talking about it again, and it seems to be, you know, not too favorable for the constituents in our city, but it seems to benefit Arvada a great deal.
Again, the only reason we even came back to you on this is because some of the folks that were at the neighborhood meeting said, we'd like to have a PEG connection through there to Haskins Station. Is that something we can do? And we said, we'll go back and talk to council and ask if they want to do it. If council says no, then no, you'll have to.
We have consensus
walk
now.
around.
I think we can move on.
No,
Well, he said they had point of order there. He said we have 4. That would be a majority that we don't proceed, and that's why I got confused.
That's what I heard. Oh, I thought
there were three votes, Ms. Dozman, Mr. Urban, and Mr. Matthews.
Yeah, I thought I heard you say
Not
3-4.
I heard 4 too. Sorry.
Not to move forward. So that the consensus did not pass.
And just a quick clarification, the request before was for an entire road.
Yes.
It wasn't for
And that
a
was
walkway.
staff driven. That was something we thought was a good idea.
Ms. Hoppy?
So I'm going to try for a consensus to go back to the consultants and ask them to bring us a 30% design plan if it's within the current contract and scope that we already have with them.
1, 2, 3, 4. That does pass as a consensus or as a majority. Is there further discussion on item number 2? Okay, it's a little after 8:15. Before we move on to the next agenda item, we'll take about a 10-minute recess. We're going to need to do our business first and chatting afterwards. Let's continue on with agenda item number 3. This is the Sloan's Lake floodplain adoption. And Mr. Westberg, do you have a short presentation on this?
I think it's shorter than the last one.
Well, I hope so.
Or I can talk faster. So I came to council in November of last year, and we talked about this issue, and we received a consensus. I just wanted to touch base with council. The Sloan's Lake floodplains have made it through all of the other approval processes with the flood district and with the state. And we have 2 new council people, so I wanted to revisit a couple of things really quickly so that they're up to speed, especially since one of the council people lives in one of these potential floodplains. Dave? So the original mapping was done back in 1977, which is 42 years ago now. We've had a lot of things change, and on the updated calculation methods, I want to say that computers have changed a tad bit since 1977. I think they probably ran the original model with cards, honestly, for those of you that even know what cards are. So the project sponsors were several cities and what is now called, as the mayor knows, the Mile High Flood District. They used to be called, well, they're still called that. Their legal name is still Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, but they've rebranded themselves as the Mile High Flood District, MHFD. It's got a couple less letters than the old acronym, and it's maybe a little easier to say. So they're now the Mile High Flood District. As you may know, and some of you do, that they get very involved with us in helping us through all of our big drainage issues. So we started this back in January of 2016. We updated the hydrology. We redid everything with the hydraulics. We added all the pipes that everyone's put in the ground since 1977. And then we've got updated mapping done, which is called a flood hazard area delineation. That's the local map that our urban drainage produces. We looked at doing additional improvements all through the area, and there were no new improvements that were deemed to be feasible and cost-effective and that kind of stuff in the city of Wheat Ridge. We could have made all the pipes 100-year size instead of just the 5-year size, but that was cost prohibitive, and so that was not moved forward. This is the Sloan's Lake floodplain. So down here is the South Platte. That's where everything starts, or ends, rather. This is Sloan's Lake. This color is Denver. This is Lakewood down here. This is unincorporated, which is mostly Crown Hill. This is Edgewater, and then we're in purple because, well, purple is the color of royalty, right? So we're in purple. I didn't do that on purpose. They just picked that color for me. This is the part that's in Wheat Ridge. This is Wadsworth, and then this is Sheridan. 32nd runs right along the northern edge of the boundary of the watershed. And then this is 26, which is mostly the boundary between us and Edgewater. City Hall, for those of you that are new, is right there on this map. So the little blue dot is the little detention pond that we have in the back of City Hall. That's there. This somewhat larger blue dot is the pond that we installed several years ago at the Richards Hart Estate as a part of the 29th Avenue Storm Sewer Project. And that information was all incorporated into this update. So we had talked last time with council back in November about 3 options. One was no action, just keep doing what we're doing. One was adopt the flood hazard areas that are shown on the new mapping as a local flood hazard area. And so that would be, a lot of jurisdictions do that, and the city would regulate those just like we regulate the flood hazard areas that are along Clear Creek and Lena Gulch. The other option, the third option, was to include the FAD as part of the special flood hazard area. So we could have mapped this just like we've got Clear Creek and Lena Gulch mapped. And for some reasons we'll talk about in a minute, we just chose not to do that, mostly because of this federal part of this issue. So we have floodplains. The reason we have them is to protect people and property. We want to communicate risk. We've identified an area that we think is a flood hazard. We want to make sure those people know about it. And also to protect them from doing things. Really, everyone's at risk, but we've identified a particular risk for this group of people. And we want to alert those property owners that they can go buy flood insurance. That they should go buy flood insurance because they're in an area that's got a higher risk than their neighbor does. And so we'd encourage them to go get flood insurance. So in our newly mapped part of Sloan's Lake, there are 62 insurable buildings. So that means something that's not a shed. It's a single-family dwelling or a multi-family dwelling. 40 of those buildings have crawl spaces or slab-on grades. 4 of those are garden level because they sort of have a walkout kind of basement situation. And 18 buildings have basements, and that becomes a big deal in just a minute. So this is our mapping area that we have. This is 29th Avenue here. This is Taylor Street over here. So City Hall is just right off the map here. This is an extension of what's called the Ashland Drainage Way that literally flows right along 26 and extends back up into Wheat Ridge here. This is Gray Street. This is what's called the Gray Street tributary that then mostly follows Gray Street up and then comes through the neighborhoods here a little bit as it comes up. We installed storm sewer after the 77 plan up Gray Street and then this way to Ingalls and then up Ingalls and then back up into the neighborhood. We also installed storm sewer along these streets as a result of that 1977 plan. These areas haven't changed a lot from the 1977 plan, but they have been updated and tweaked with some redevelopment that happened up in this area. So these purple buildings are the ones that are just in the floodplain. The green ones down here, sorry, Larry, you're going to struggle with these, I'm sure. The green ones down here are garden level, and then all these orange buildings that you see scattered around are all the ones that have basements. And so when we talked about this last time, we talked about the three different options and what the implications are. So what notification levels the various options have, what the insurance requirements are, and what the flood insurance rates are. And it was that rate for option 3 that really took that one off the table. Those folks that have basements would eventually, or relatively soon, depending on the situation, be paying somewhere in the neighborhood of $20,000 for flood insurance. Because the flood insurance is based on your lowest habitable floor, and that would be that basement, okay? Now, if we go with the option that we chose, which is number 2, they're not within the federally regulated FEMA-mapped floodplain. So flood insurance is voluntary for all those areas outside of that. It's mandatory for those areas inside if you have a federally backed loan. But it's voluntary outside of that. And because it's outside of the federally regulated floodplain, they get what's called a preferred risk policy. Because they're a preferred risk, they're not in the high risk zone that FEMA's identified. The insurance is generally less than $500 a year. Now, all those things depend on deductibles and how much you cover and all that stuff. Our average in Wheat Ridge for the people that get preferred risk policies last year was $381 a year, so about $30 a month. And again, it's voluntary. And in talking with the folks that were here earlier today, I ran outside and talked with them. And one of their neighbors actually has flood insurance because they've been on the mailing list from Urban Drainage since 1977 when they started doing the mailings. So these folks know that they've got a risk. It's not been something we've regulated as a city before. So one of their neighbors actually went and got flood insurance based on that mailing from Urban Drainage. So at the November meeting, the direction was to go down this middle path, which is voluntary flood insurance less than $500 a year, in some cases much less than that. And then we would apply the city regulations to those flood hazard areas. And that's why we'd adopt those as local flood hazard areas. So what it means for our city, if we do this, is that those folks will continue to get the Mile High Flood District brochure. I got to get used to saying that. They'll get added to our invitation to the annual meeting that we have every year on floodplains. And the state and city requirements disclose floodplain status. Because it would be an adopted local floodplain, if they sell their house, they've got to tell the folks who are potentially buying it that we're in a local flood hazard area. And if you have questions, go call Mark. It's not a federal, and they can explain what they understand about it, and the potential buyer can call me. But again, the idea is we want people to know there's a risk there. That's the whole idea with our floodplains. The insurance is voluntary. We highly recommend it. It'll likely be less than $500 a year. And the regulations in city code, when I looked at the city code, the big things is they'd have to come get a floodplain permit from me to do things like build a fence or a shed or do grading in their backyard if they want to add on to their house. If their house catches fire and they want to rebuild it, those things will require a floodplain permit. So there's an additional little bit of process there. If they're going to build new structures that are habitable, they've got to build those structures a foot above the base flood elevation. So in addition to having the outline of the floodplain, we have what the elevation of the water is going to be through there. And so we can tell someone if they're going to add on their house into that floodplain, which they're allowed to do, we just want to make sure that new piece of the house is a foot above that flood elevation so that they don't run the risk of that new piece of the house getting wet if we have a 100-year flood. And then for other things like sheds and fences, they've just got to build them with flood-resistant materials because the area might get inundated for 30 minutes or an hour if we have a little bit of a storm. And talking with the folks there, they said the last storm we had on Saturday, they had like 1.5 inches flowing through their backyard on Saturday a couple of weeks ago. And so we do have water that gets there. And our idea is with flood-resistant that it wouldn't get damaged to the point that they have to go replace it every time we get a big rain and it runs where we think it's going to run. So again, it's just really a confirmation from City Council that you guys want us to proceed on this path. We had 2 new council people, and one of those actually lives within this area. And so we want to make sure that you guys are okay with us proceeding down the path of adopting these. So another grenade in the room.
Thank you, Mr. Westberg. You're right. That was succinct. Appreciate that. Mr. Keeter.
Quick question, all of the work in 29th Avenue, is any of that designed to accommodate additional storm flows? Specifically thinking that drain that dropped down just east between my house and the other house, that would sometimes get backed up. Is any of the current work designed to mitigate or improve that?
There was no additional capacity built into the existing system. It's a 5-year system. Was when it's designed that we kept it as a 5-year system because it doesn't make sense to upgrade something in the middle. It's not very effective. With rebuilding 29th and adding the curb and gutter and the things we're doing, it's going to help the street itself function better, which has been an issue near your house for a long time with things just not draining. We've got positive drainage in all the streets now. We are rebuilding some of the inlets and stuff. And then with the work that Edgewater is going to do to the south, they're going to be putting some pipes and stuff in to get all of this, whatever gets to them at Kendall Street, they're going to get that down, further south to 26. So they are doing some work with that development down south, and the development down south knows about this project and all these things. So,
additional questions or comments? Ms. Hoppy?
So even though Mark made it really clear, I just want to verify that when we do a local flood hazard area, it does not require the citizens in that area to purchase insurance. However, they will then be on a list where they will be notified that they are in the flood area. Because I believe I read through here, the city has done some work. We become, they get a discount because of.
Yes. Yeah, so that discount applies to folks that are in the mapped floodplains, because these folks are already getting such a low rate, the discount doesn't apply to them. But
Okay.
the discount does apply to everyone else. And we would gain a few more points by adopting this area.
And then we'd have our codes to where, like, if somebody was scraping a lot and building something new, then we obviously wouldn't allow them to put a basement in that area, knowing that it would be in the flood area.
They actually could if they designed it properly. If they raised everything up enough and raised the ground around the basement enough that the water would all go around and stuff like that. So it wouldn't preclude a basement. They just have to, it's some extra steps to try to, again, protect their investment of what they're doing on their property, is the way we see it from the city side of things.
Thanks. All right, so I'm going to ask for consensus to adopt the Sloan's Lake floodplain plan as a local flood hazard area.
And we have a consensus on that. Thank you very much, Mr.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mr.
Could I indulge for about just a 30-second update on the Clear Creek floodplain and where we're at on that, just for a quick update?
You may, while we have Mr. Westberg here.
I'm still waiting. As you may have heard before, it's been a very difficult floodplain to model. Our part's easy. Everything just runs right next to the creek and stuff. But down the Denver area, water jumps out, it jumps back in. So they had all that resolved earlier this year, and they thought we were moving forward. I thought I'd have draft maps in time for my March meeting. I was thrilled. And then as they were double-checking things, because they like to double-check things, they discovered that the Tennyson Street Bridge was modeled incorrectly. It was modeled 3 feet too high. And so they checked, and 4 of the other bridges were modeled incorrectly. I think they were on a datum that existed prior when they used basically the as-built plans to do that. So they went and checked those. The other 4 bridges are fine, but Tennyson Street does hit the water, and so it changed everything. So they're going through all that again. Right now, our hope is that we get draft maps sometime in September. Just our adoption schedule for the Sloan's Lake, I just wanted you guys to be aware we're going to go to Planning Commission on August 15th, and then we'd see you for first reading in September, and then come to you on October 14th. There's a chance that we could do a quick update at that meeting on where we are with Clear Creek again, if you want to ask me the same question.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Let us move to agenda item number 4. This is the city treasurer duties and compensation. And I believe we have our city treasurer.
While he's coming up here, Mr. Mayor, if
Yes.
you would let me, I forgot to introduce one of our newest staff members. Karen O'Donnell is sitting through this wonderful meeting with us. Karen O'Donnell, you want to stand up? She's our new Parks and Rec director. She stole her from Commerce City, so this is her second Monday with us. So thanks for coming.
Okay. Chris, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Introduce yourself, please.
I am Chris Miller. I am
Chris
the
Miller.
city treasurer, as most of you know. Appointed last February to the position, took over for Jerry DiTullio, and my position here will be up for election in November. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit about the city's investment portfolios. I haven't had a chance to come to you formally and talk about this, and I thought this was a good opportunity because this is definitely germane to the position itself. Overall, when I assumed the position, I identified that the city uses something called a local government investment pool, LGIP. We use a service called CSAFE. Generally speaking, we have $14.5 million in our general fund revenues, general fund investments, pardon me, and for 2E, we have approximately $25.6 million invested for that fund. Overall, minimal amounts are kept in the bank overnight, and that's a good thing. We try to sweep as much into CSAFE on a consistent basis in order to yield higher investment earnings. Some of the benefits of using an LGIP include safety and preservation of our principal. You may have heard the adage, I'm more concerned on the return of my principal than the return on my principal. When it comes to city and public funds, safety is the most important rather than the return on your investment. And as such, there's very limited things in which we can invest in because we need to ensure that we're in the most safest possible investments. So we don't play the market with respect to things like stocks and so forth. Another benefit is that we have a relatively small, modest investment pool. It wouldn't really be who of us to, let's say, hire a person that would just do investments. These services are made available to things like smaller municipalities and school districts, smaller counties and such, in order to provide investment services that they may otherwise not make themselves available to. Another big component is that we have a lot of regulatory compliance, again, with the type of investments that we can invest in. If you turn the page, I have a list here. The top section identifies the items which are permissible by the Colorado revised statutes. If you look at these are things that are very safe when it comes to investments. So we have U.S. treasuries, federal agencies such as Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac type of investments, municipal bonds or munis, highly rated commercial paper, and repurchase agreements. We also have a time limit in which we can invest city money, going out to up to 5 years, and kind of at the bottom of that list you see LGIPs. So those are where we invest all of our monies for the most part, but they are subject to the same restrictions as far as what type of investments they can invest in. Okay, on the next page. So when I first started this position, I met with all of the major LGIPs in the state. I have them identified here on the left by their logos: CSAFE, Colotrust, CSIP, and I did an analysis of the products that they offer and took into account our needs and so forth, and I decided that where we were at was a good place to stay. We were in CSAFE before. I think that CSAFE was a good place to keep our money. However, I moved over to a different investment product called Colorado Core. Colorado Core is an investment product that offers fewer redemptions each month, but based on the cash needs of the city. For example, we only do 2 payrolls, or 2 check processings each month. So given that, we were able to better identify when we would need cash and how much, because we print the checks, go back and say, all right, these are our cash needs, this is what we have on hand, and line those up a little bit better. So because we had relatively small volatility in the cash that we need on a day-to-day basis, this Colorado Core product matched a lot better. And the benefit of it was that we were able to get anywhere between 10 to 12 basis points each month. It's not really a heck of a lot, but I've estimated just by making that small change since the time I came on and implemented this, we've earned at least another $12,000 in interest earnings, and I estimate by the end of the year that that would increase to another $48,000 just by making a simple change above and beyond what we've already done. If it was a rotisserie oven and you just set it and forget it, that would be the end of it, but there's more. Since I've actually come on, interest rates have dropped quite a bit in the open market, and it's something I've been monitoring very closely in order to try to determine what's the best strategy for sitting money, all the while keeping that highly investment grade of our securities. Unfortunately, markets continue to have a lot of volatility, and we've seen a 30 basis point drop just since the beginning of the year. So that kind of gives a segue over to yield curves. This is kind of, if you open up a finance textbook, you'd see something about yield curves. It's kind of the bellwether indicator of where things are going with respect to interest rates. Typically, yield curves are upward sloping. So what that means is shorter term investments get lower interest rates and longer term gets higher. So the longer that we invest out, the more money we would expect in return. If you look at following the graphs here from kind of clockwise, we see a typical a yield curve, which was the situation we're in back in October of last year. Move over to what we're dealing now with the blue line, we have an inverted yield curve. So what that indicates is that longer term investments are actually paying less than shorter term. It's kind of unusual, and unfortunately, the last kind of slide here at the bottom right, this shows when the spread on the 10-year to the 1-year Treasury, kind of the difference between those two. Anytime that goes negative, so to speak, it's a precursor to a recession. But moving on to the next things. But wait, there's more. On the other hand, though, there's definitely some mixed signals in this market, right? We've heard recently the S&P just recently hit an all-time high. Remember, S&P is more of the equities, whereas we're kind of in this other type of investment, so we don't get to necessarily yield that. Some of you say, well, you know, my mutual fund is at an all-time high. I'm doing great. What do you mean that, you know, there could be some uncertainty in the market? That's why we're just investing in different types of investment products. Also, we've seen things like consumer confidence at a high. So there's lots of just uncertainty in the markets. Things related to the trade, I'm not sure what the right word is, tariffs and such internationally is causing some hesitancy in the market. So given this, I am currently working on a strategy to try to invest into a different LGIP. If you remember, one of the ones on the bottom is called CSIP, Colorado Statewide Investment Pool. They offer a different product, which I think is definitely a good fit for the city. What this allows us to do is to invest a portion of our cash in a longer term investment. Essentially what we do is lock up a portion of our cash for a longer period of time. Remember when the yield curve was upward sloping? The idea is that we would get a little bit better investment by investing in the longer term. They have different products that are available to invest from anywhere from 90 days up to 1 year. We could write up the yield curve. It requires us to be a little bit sharpen our pencils a bit, so to speak, with respect to cash management. So we have to know to a certain degree when we might be needing our cash and so forth, because definitely we lose that liquidity. So let's say we lock it all up in a long term, whoops, we forgot a payroll's coming. That wouldn't happen. But so to speak, you know, those checks could bounce. So we have to be cognizant of that. On the next slide. I'm recommending this, that we consider our 2E funding to use this type of approach. What's great about 2E is that Number one, we've got debt service associated with it. So we know that every June and December, we're going to have some interest payments, and in December, we hit the principal payments as well. So just that portion of this, we could use as a strategy to gain a little bit higher investment earnings on that portion. And with respect to the construction projects themselves, we could sit down and work with our project managers and some of our consultants that are working on the major Big Four, that is 2E, and try to line up those cash outflows with some investment maturities in order to, again, climb the yield curve, so to speak. Overall, Wheat Ridge is a saver organization. I mentioned before that we have this $14.5 million in our general fund. We're not actively kind of pulling that down. So I think that, again, to climb up the yield curve a bit, we should also look at investing a core of that money in something that's a little bit long-term rather than the liquid portfolio, which we have traditionally done here in the city. So having said that, I'm actively working with CSAFE to identify best strategy to transition some of our investments over from CSAFE to CSIP and use some of this termed portfolio product. I think it's a great fit for the city. I wanted to bring up the municipal code and to talk about the duties of the treasurer. The treasurer position is referenced several times in the code, but these are the primary duties, as we all know. The first one, I would say, I'm not going to go ahead and read these. I'll let you do it, and I know that you have access to the municipal code. I do have, I always scratch my head about this one. It says that the treasurer will establish a system of accounting and do so with respect to generally accepted accounting principles. That is such a vague and broad statement. I've kind of interpreted it to be that, that the treasurer position traditionally had let's say, day-to-day fiscal management responsibilities assigned to him or her. As we know, that has transitioned a lot of the positions. Oh, thank you. As you know, that the city staff no longer reports to the city treasurer, so that is perhaps have changed, and it's opportunity to be clarified if we ever bring this to a vote and so forth as far as what the duties of the treasurer are. The other one I think is still relevant, of course, investment of the city's money. It continues to be a major component of the treasurer's responsibility. Third one is cash management and banking. Typically in any large organization, cash management and banking services are usually part of the treasury function. Even in large corporations, they'll have a treasury section, and what they do is they utilize banking products in order to expedite cash flows into their investments. So it's not just the investments itself, it's figuring out how to get cash that are receivables using variable, let's say, services like a lockbox, for example, in order to get that to be invested and so forth. The other item here is the treasurer shall supervise any staff under his or her jurisdiction. The treasurer has not supervised any employees since 2003, so I think that's another opportunity for update. And there's other duties assigned to the treasurer. I led an administrative hearing for taxes when I first started. I think it was the first week. Got kind of pushed into the deep end there, but yes, that went well. The person did not show up, however. We still had the hearing, and I had to make a ruling based on the facts. But it was a great first week, and I learned a lot. But I also think that this is an important role for the treasurer because it really acts like a taxpayer advocate and ombudsman. I had the opportunity to waive to a certain extent any penalties and interest associated with that had the taxpayer showed up and advocated on their side and the reasoning for whatever the audit determination was. I think that it's good that this position has that ability to do that, so I think it's important. Overall, the treasurer is referenced over 100 times in the municipal code, and I'm also a part of the police pension board, and I have responsibility for the city's investment policy. Next up, I have the time commitment. A lot of people have asked me, what about time? And I know that on earlier discussions, that the number was important and it kept coming up. I would say on average, this position is 1 to 2 days a week. I tend to kind of be a little bit of an overachiever, so I do a lot of research on my own after where I'm not necessarily in the office. Since I've started, I've made it a point to be here at least 1 day a week, and I'm lucky in that regard, in that my day job, so to speak, allows me to do that. So I've been consistently here, I think, 1 day a week, when depending on, of course, situations of the other job. But when I'm not, I'm definitely working online and I'm available as well. When we want to talk about this, rather than, I'd like to think of it more, approach of it from a full-time equivalent perspective. I think an FTE is, about 40 hours a week or 2080 per year. I think it's somewhere in the range of 0.2 FTE to 0.33. So I've given you some range of what I think is reasonable as far as the time commitment. Again, I'm a bit of an overachiever, so sometimes I put in way more hours than this, but that's me. The person that has this job in November, if it's not me, maybe, doing something else, 1 day or less or more. So just something to consider. I have Patrick help me with a little bit of the salary history. I don't know a lot of the particulars of how it evolved, so I might defer to Patrick on that. But as you can see, from 1999, it was 33. It's been lowered twice. In both 2001 and 2003, there was a bit of a shakeup. I don't know what the right word is. But in August of 2003, the treasurer resigned. It made a recommendation to the council at the time that the city staff report to the city manager and be part of the administrative services team. As a municipal employee myself in my day job, I think that is a good idea. Having city employees report to an elected official isn't always the best situation for them, and I think that the current framework of how the city employees report to the manager ultimately is ideal. And then finally, back in 2007, the salary was set at $29,000. So I'm just going to give that information to you and let you guys discuss as far as what's appropriate, if that's something you want to discuss tonight. And first, and lastly, I just want to say thank you for bringing this up. Recently, somebody told me, like, why is this coming up? Are you in trouble, or what have you done wrong? or something like that. And my response was, I don't think that it's a problem at all that's bringing it up. Actually, it's good that we're kind of bringing this up and we're talking about it, and does this position add value to the citizens and so forth. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. We've got a lot of questions going around. I'll start with Ms. Dozeman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Chris. This was a very thorough presentation. Thank you for kind of breaking it down in layman's terms. I mean, very good job. Thank you. I do have one question about, like, what kind of interactions do you have with the citizenry and residents? Is it a lot or not so much, or do you have people reaching out to you and asking questions or anything of that nature?
I haven't had a lot of specific questions asked me from citizens. I've had a few phone calls that thank me for applying for the position. I had a couple questions from the Cultural Commission regarding revenues and such, but not a lot from the citizens so far.
Ms. Davis?
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation. And just as we predicted, you're doing a great job, so thank you for that. And actually, the question came up before your time. So next time when you ask somebody, you could say, hey, it came up before me, so I'm in the clear. And I will say I was one of the people that brought it up, and a lot of it is because folks have voiced concerns around this role, around the role itself. Should it be an elected official role? I see the pros and cons of both. I think, folks say, it gives transparency and this person can and report to the people and those types of things. And we are very fortunate, and I hope as fortunate in the next 4 years, to have someone as competent as yourself. So thank you for that. And thank you, voters, for hopefully instilling that in the next 4 years. I think one of the things that I struggle with is that potentially next election period, this election period, it might not be you. And if that were the case, I think as you outlined from the charter, there's a lot of things that aren't any longer the role of the treasurer, and so thank you for that, because that helps too. And I think some of it's about investing, but there's a limited amount. However, appreciate some of your tenacity and being able to kind of test some things out. But I also, again, I kind of go back to that this could be somebody that does not have that background. And so many times when I'm looking at the position, or whenever we're even creating a position, you know, I always tell my manager, whomever, you can't look at the person, you have to kind of look at the role, and what that is, because based off of your qualifications, based off of everything, I think this salary is adequate. I think previously we spoke about it before you even started. And again, I think a lot of this, as city council folks and the time we put in, you know, I don't think any of us are receiving our average hourly pay if you put that into context. So part of it is kind of saying, hey, I'm doing this as a community, for my community, because this is an expertise of mine that I could support my community in doing it. And it's not necessarily I'm doing it for a FTE amount of dollar. So I think that's where I struggle, because with you sitting here today and you telling me this, I have no problems, yay, boom, done. But I think on the flip side, when we look at how many hours our mayor puts in and those types of things, that it's just different than some of the others. So I think that's my struggle, and because we don't ever know what ballots and elections bring, that makes it a little tougher. So that's my thoughts and kind of how it was brought up to begin with.
Thank you. Ms. Weaver.
I don't have a lot of background on the history of all this, and I was just curious, Patrick, could you tell us just a little bit about where this position is with other cities and the compensation, and you know, like it makes total sense to me to treat it as an FTE, but what you say makes total sense as well. And just how do we think about this position? Because I don't know if other places have elected treasurers or.
They don't. There's maybe 2 or 3 others in the state. Maybe not even that many at this point. Most cities, the role is handled by staff, professional staff, that would have the background in education and experience in finance or whatever else is needed. So yeah, Wheat Ridge is fairly unique in that situation, and yeah, I think Chris is probably my 5th city treasurer I've worked with, and they've all done great work in different ways, and yeah, starting with Mr. Tutulo and extending with Chris, yeah, they've really taken a hard look at the investments and made some significant changes. And part of the budget report I sent out to you, you see there's about a 40% increase over last year. So they're doing a lot of great work on that. Yeah, when I first came here in 2002, Ron Patera was the city treasurer, and he was, I believe, a CPA. He had the background also, and that's what he does now. I think he left because he got a professional job in Utah for a city, but he was the one that recommended that, just because of he saw how our staff was working with him and his staff, that it made more sense that that team should be all under the Administrative Services Department instead of an elected official who comes and goes. It's not that elected officials are bad. It's just it's better to have a more consistent leadership and management from a staff that's here full time.
Clarifying question. So are we advising about discussing whether it's elected or not, or simply the compensation for this position? I guess I'm a little confused on what we're,
Compensation. The
Just
elected
the
question is
compensation.
that it would be a city charter change, so that.
okay,
that
okay.
would be-
So my follow-up question then is, at the FTE comparison of 0.2 or 0.25, what is 29,000 compared to a full-time position of a financial person?
Assuming it would be full-time.
Okay, in these other cities that don't have an elected position, that have a financial person,
What does it cost?
what does it cost? And what would this be 0.2 or 0.25 of a full-time salary of a person like that? Did that make sense?
Yeah, I guess the other question I would have along the lines is, would this be absorbed by current staff, or would we have to hire somebody? Do we have that expertise that could do some of this, or would it take more FTEs to do it as well?
Ellie, do you want to speak to this, or? We haven't, I don't know if we put that much thought into this specific question, but.
I mean, I think it's both. I mean, one, would it require a full-time FTE replacement, or is it something that?
No,
would be-
I can start there. It would not require a full-time equivalent replacement. If we have the current expertise in-house, we have a very good finance manager right now who I think probably would pick up these duties if he could, if he had to. I don't think that was the case in the past until very recently. So it was, it's kind of nice to have a separate person doing the investments, I believe, is what I'd recommend, that it's out of staff's hands. It's done by an elected official. I think that is a benefit. It's scary if you don't get somebody in that position, though, that has Chris's background. I think we hit the jackpot with Chris, and he's doing an amazing job. But there's no guarantee you're always going to get a Chris. Did we answer?
I didn't get my question answered.
Okay.
I'm just curious, is 29,000 commiserate to a person who's qualified for 0.2 to 0.25 FTE?
Yeah, I actually just did the math, and it came in at $30,000 based on a $100,000 a year.
Thank you.
Employee, which is probably a good starting point to use for that kind of a position.
Thanks, that's all.
Yeah.
Additional discussion? But as I understand the regulations, we would not be able to, or we can change the salary, but when would it be effective?
You'd have to do it before this election.
And is it by election, or is it by the person itself?
By the term. So
The term.
Yep. So Chris is running for a new term. So you could do it before November election.
And it would be for the new term.
It would be for the new term, whoever it is.
So do we have any further discussion on the city treasurer's duties and compensation?
I mean, Chris, can I ask you a question, because I'm going to be the bad guy because no one's saying anything? I guess my question is okay, so it sounds like we'd be paying you for your, basically based off of your skill level, for fairly based off of your hourly, more or less what you're doing. But I guess my question is, as a citizen of Wheat Ridge, I mean, is it your expectation to get paid to that?
Of course not, no. I think that, like I said before, looking at this with respect to the duties and such is important. I personally, you asked me what my expectations are. I would do this for less if I had to, but at the same rate, if we reduce it to a point that we may not get enough individuals willing to do this job that I think are qualified, we may limit the pool of people that let's say have other sources of income, let's say the retired individuals or people that don't have a day job. So it's more than just me in a lot of ways that we should consider this.
I agree, but I also think it could flip the other way. I mean, you could get the professional that's like, okay, I'm retiring, I'll go ahead and do this, and this is my background. Or you could get the individual that might say, I'm retiring, maybe I'll run for this, and give it a wing and don't have the background.
Correct.
You know, so I guess, you know, I guess, again, I think about, you know, part of it is about community service regardless. It's not about retirement and winding down into retirement and those types of things. And so, I mean, I personally, and again, Chris, love you, nothing to do with you, feel like it's just a role that, again, a lot of it has the support of staff and those types of things. The nice thing is the city does have that transparency with this person. They feel like they have elected official also keeping eyes on things, but it is kind of a double check in some ways with a little extra muster because he's investing more. I just look at some of the hours that, you know, the mayor puts in and stuff, and maybe it's not about comparing those two, and sorry, Bud, but I'm picking on you. But again, I think it's again, a lot of us are here putting in a lot of hours for not a commiserate salary. I would recommend we change it, but
Ms. Weaver.
I really disagree with that because I think you're, and I don't know if I'm going to say this right, but I feel like you're lowering your standards by lowering the money that you're putting out there. We have been very lucky, but I also think when it's an elected official, there is a check and balance of having some very competent people come through. Are we going to occasionally have people who aren't competent? Yes, but I also think that there's, I would hesitate. I respectfully disagree. I don't think we should lower this.
Mr. Keeter.
I'm just assuming that it would probably take a charter change in order to set any sort of minimum qualifications for the position.
No, I believe Mr. Dahl opined, I'd have to look this up, that you could do that as part of code. So city council could decide that.
Sorry.
I thought he did. I'd have to.
Go ahead, Ms. Davis.
I remember looking at that, and I think back in the day, there was something like that if you had certain things, and I would support that. I mean, I would support if you have certain qualifications, then I have no problems with this. But, I mean, I have an MBA, and yeah, I know things, but I don't know things like he knows things. You know,
yeah.
and I think that's, you know, and I think the thing is even with an MBA, if you have good accounting people, they could pull a fast one on you unless you're really good at looking at things like Chris. So I would support that. So may I make a consensus?
And just to clarify that, just so you know, what council did pass back in May of 2003 was that whoever was in this seat would get the same salary as the mayor unless they had some qualifying experience or background, such as a CPA or such, and then they'd get $22,000 a year. That passed, but then council rescinded it in August. I believe for some political reasons, if I remember, and then they put it back to just $37,000.
But
then it was lowered to 29 several years later. I don't know the exact date on that. We think it was about 2007.
But the charter says the qualifications for treasurer are to live in the city.
Live in the city and registered
And be registered elector.
Yep.
So those are the qualifications.
But I think by code you can add some stuff. We'd have to double check with Dahl, but.
Ms. Davis.
So I would like to ask, I'm going to just start with a consensus because I think in this case it would be fair, and a little bit it's based off of the person and the role, and that it be that we ask legal if there's a way that we could create such a document again and have it read something similar to that you make what the mayor makes unless you can show, CPA or other certification type of experience.
And I know we can do that because we did it before, unless something's changed since
So
2000.
I'd like to make a consensus on that.
Consensus on that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's a consensus there.
And what's the, if, so mayor salary, or what was the?
I would say the current,
29?
yeah.
Okay.
That would be my intention of the consent.
Additional discussion? Mr. Matthews?
I'm a little torn on this one, but we already have a consensus, so I guess, I don't know if I'm speaking out of place or not. Just for future discussions, I mean, I kind of like, in a way, having an elected official in the position, but just like fish after 2 terms, elected officials start to smell a little bit. So I like to see a turnover, and I do, as someone mentioned here, as we consider this further, think that we do have to consider that I think this particular position doesn't necessarily equate to the mayor's position, any more than it does to ours. I think there's a lot more technical, financial responsibility and knowledge, and well, hopefully, but I'm just saying, I think it requires a little bit higher technical skill than the mayor's position, and so I hope when we get to final consideration on this, that we'll remember that.
Mr. Miller, are you familiar with other types of control or advice in using a committee, an investment committee that monitors or oversees or supervises or something similar, the investment strategy that might be employed as a different model for sort of financial management?
My experience has been mostly in Denver. I worked in their treasury for 5 years, and actually they have large enough investment portfolio where they actually have a full-time city staff that do it. So I personally don't have a lot of experience in investment by committee approach. However, I have, when just looking at some research on this, I have seen that approach used in some municipalities and so forth, where it's similar to this body, where you have individuals come in and they vote on a particular course of action. So one individual, such as here in Wheat Ridge, is given all the discretion to make the investment decisions, whereas it's delegated to a committee. So that's definitely an option.
One of our previous city treasurers, Larry Schultz, he created a committee, and he had 2 or 3 people from the community who were had backgrounds in banking or investments, and took advice from them. But it was his decision in the end what to do, I think, on the investments.
Additional discussion? Mr. Matthews?
I guess we have to be a little careful and run this by legal too, because when I look at the charter, it says what it says for qualification for the treasurers, they should have the same qualifications as the council members. So I don't know that we can tack extra.
Again, it was done in 2003, legally or not, but we'll make the city attorney look at it again.
That's what I just remembered that.
And doesn't that kind of go back to your point of like the technical, so for instance, like a treasurer needs that technical ability but it's not equal to, is it, or is it just
I wouldn't
based off
disagree
of
with
the
that. What I'm
position?
saying is, right now, the way the language is, it's just the same qualifications as city councilors.
So it says the same as city
The same.
councilors.
So how you can break that apart, I don't know if you can.
Mr. Urban?
Just one last thing, I haven't really spoken on this issue, but I find it a little bit difficult that one group of elected officials is talking about what another elected official should or shouldn't do. And as it relates to city council, I would like to see our compensation changed to a per meeting basis, so that if we attend all the meetings that we're supposed to, then we get paid what we're supposed to. But if we don't attend the meetings, then we don't get paid. So if we're talking about what the treasurer shouldn't do, or what the qualifications should be or shouldn't be for them, and the concerns we might get someone in there that we don't want, just the same can be said about council, that you get a council member elected that doesn't show up or participate in the meetings. So that's one of my concerns, is we're focused on the treasurer when we should be focused on ourselves. So I don't think we need to be changing the qualifications for the treasurer. Yes, that seems very, sort of vague as far as the qualifications, but that's up to the electors to decide who they want to elect in that position, and that should be their choice. So that's why I would be against that. And I don't know if we need to look at this further as far as council compensation, but if we're going to look at the treasurer, we might as well look at each one, because it's a little unfair to pick on the treasurer and not consider ours as well. But I would like us to at least, consider moving to a per meeting compensation as opposed to just a simple salary.
Did we get consensus on the last? We did, didn't we? Okay.
Any thoughts?
Is there further discussion?
First of all, the intent was not to pick on anybody. I think it was just brought up because I actually had a couple people approach me citizens-wise. So, because not many cities do have a treasurer, so the intent was not to pick on anyone.
Well, sure, I'm not saying that we're picking.
I know, but I'm just using your word pick, and it wasn't to pick on anyone. It was just to review it. And I would be fine. Of course, I only have 3 months left, but I think I would be fine. And I think the other thing you have to think about is, people are going to miss meetings. So even if it's a certain percentage of meetings, I think someone's going to have a perfect attendance, in the case of an illness or a death in the family or things like that is a little bit ridiculous to do. Because, life happens. But, if you wanted to look at anybody's, I have no problem with that.
Well, Ms. Hoppy?
I would just say you still have to watch the meeting and read the packet to be prepared for the information that you missed at the meeting, so.
And you're not tracking the events you go to or the phone calls or emails.
Point of
or
order.
walking streets and that type of thing.
Mr. Matthews?
I think we're off topic.
Okay. We are, because the discussion was really centered around the city treasurer, his duties and his compensation, and it would appear that we've concluded that discussion. Ms. Weaver?
I just wanted to thank Mr. Miller for coming in, and it was a really great. You explained things in a very understandable way. Thank you.
And I'd like to echo
that comment may be out of order. I'm not sure. But well, okay.
I think Mr. Miller has done a fine job, and I
very much
would like the voters out there to know that I have confidence in what he's doing for us.
Well, Mr. Miller, thank you for your presentation and coming tonight and your work on behalf of the city. So that concludes item number 4. Item number 5 is staff reports. Mr. Goff.
Yeah, just real briefly, it's getting late, but I sent you the second quarter budget report for 2019, I think last week sometime. So if you have any questions, please let us know. But just real briefly, things look good. For 2019, we are meeting projections on revenues, which is always a great thing. We're at actually 105% of what we projected. So actually brought in about $700,000 more than we projected at this time. For this time of the year, our expenditures are actually lower than we expected to spend by this time of the year. We're at about 87% of prorated. What's that? Yep, there's some vacancies. If you want to compare general fund revenues just year over year, we're up 6.2% for the first 6 months of June compared to 2018. A good chunk of that, and Mr. Matthews sent me an email is use tax. As you know, there's a lot of commercial development activity going on in the city, so that we get a lot of use tax revenue. Those are one time because we have peaks and valleys on when use tax comes in. But a good chunk of that this year was for the Rocky Mountain Bottle Company remodel or upgrade. And our unrestricted fund balance was quite large at the end of 2018 because, again, the Rocky Mountain Bottle gave us a check for use tax of just over $1 million. City Council agreed to refund a portion of that. But then we spent less in 2018 as expected, and we brought in quite a bit more revenue than expected. So our fund balance at the end of 2018 was just over $14 million, or 44% of general fund operating expenditures. City Council's policy is that we target a 25% reserve, minimum of 17%. So for 19, we're working on the 2020 budget right now. We're projecting at the end of 19, this fiscal year, we should have just under 10 million in our unrestricted fund balance, which is about a 26% reserve. So things are looking pretty good. We are busy crunching budget numbers for 2020. So we plan to get to the proposed budget to City Council the 1st of September. So you guys have a couple weekends to review that before we bring it to a study session. So that's it.
Thank you. We will go to elected officials matters. We'll start with Ms. Dozeman.
Yeah, so I have to put a shameless plug in for our 50th annual Wheat Ridge Carnation Festival celebration that's going to be happening this weekend. So August 9th, 10th, and 11th. I'm just looking at the schedule and we have a whole lot to offer. So we're going to be doing live music on 2 stages. We'll have fireworks at 9:15 at night, both nights, the famous spaghetti dinner. We have the Grange Pancake Breakfast from 7 to 9 at the Grange Hall off 30th and High Court on Saturday morning, right before the parade kicks off at 9:30. And we all have a really cool float, and most of us are going to be walking in there. So I'm inviting all of our community to come and meet your neighbors and have a drink and enjoy the music. And so I'll see you there.
Thank you. Additional public, Ms. Hoppy.
I might have 2 things, one quick and one I'm very sorry is not quick. The first one is scheduling. I don't know if you guys have noticed on the future agenda items, but we do have some things that we're trying to kind of fit in there before we look at the budget. So we have a few special study sessions after meetings. Those meetings are not extremely long, that the special study session is after. They are typically 4 to 5 things, have 1 or 2 first readings in it. So I'm really hoping that we won't, I'm not trying to keep everybody here really late, but we just have a thing where we don't have a lot of things to go on the business meetings, but we have a lot of things that need to come up in study session and we don't have the dates. So I'm just forewarning everybody, take a look at the future study session or future council meetings and you'll see where those special study sessions have been added. Second, I'd like to pass these this way. On Thursday, I was at our regular monthly Wheat Ridge Business District meeting, and we have effectively utilized all of our funding for this year so far. And what I'm passing out is in 2019, the awardees of our grant programs. I think there's 15 of them in the typical categories, which is ADA compliance, update, visual impact, landscape, paint, new signs, or converting a pole sign to a monument sign. And then in the Facade Plus, we have two recipients of our grants. And so out of the irregular grants, we have granted $80,263 and some change. And we have been able to utilize that to get $338,211 in investment in our aging commercial building stock. For the Facade Plus program, we granted $55,000 and it returned us $273,623 in investment in our aging commercial building stock. So tonight, I am going to ask you guys if you will consider, I've been asked by the board from the Wheat Ridge Business District to ask if you guys would consider a supplemental budget funding us an additional $25,000 for us to do the remainder of 2019 for the remainder of our grants. I can tell you some of the things if you have some questions. I also brought, in case anybody hasn't seen, this is an overview. I only brought 3 of them because I didn't know if everybody would want one, but overview of the grants. Our ADA grant, we will grant up to $6,000. This is a 50% match, so to get $6,000, you have to spend $12,000, and this is because a lot of our old commercial buildings don't have ADA bathrooms, they don't have ADA access.
Point of order. Is this really an official, I mean, if we're talking budget here, does this really come under elected officials matters to try and schedule and ask for money?
We do put items on the agenda at this time. It wouldn't.
I mean, people have made motions at the end of meetings.
That's what I'm asking. Instead of getting all this information, could we just get the request to put it on the agenda and then just have a consensus on that?
I mean, I just thought you would want more information, but so I'm asking for a consensus to put onto a regular business meeting a supplemental budget of $25,000 to the Wheat Ridge Business District.
Can I ask just one question?
Yes.
Of this awarded, how much of that is paid out? Because I remember one time seeing something, and like some people were awarded it, but they weren't paid out, so.
They get 6 months, and then if they don't do it in 6 months, they get a one-time extension, and then after that, we make them reapply. So at this point, all of this awarded means that these are people who are within their time frame to spend that money. So they have to spend it and then come back and get reimbursed for
When
it.
we look at it, can we just see how much of it was actually awarded?
That's how much has been awarded.
I mean,
This is how much
paid
we've
out,
promised.
spent.
But this is how much we've promised. See what I'm saying? Like, so
Right,
we
but
can't
I guess-
promise more than we have.
Right, but I guess my thing is if I was awarded it and I'm not gonna be done until April of 2020, that's when you're paying me.
No, you have 6 months to do it.
I know, but let's just say my 6 months is April 2020, and that's when I project to be done.
So once it's awarded, then it's earmarked funding, and so it's not in our budget.
Okay.
So your consensus is to put this on a study session?
My consensus is to bring it to a meeting, to the next business meeting.
Bring it to a business meeting?
There is a study session where the Wheat Ridge Business District Chair, Joe DeMott, will be here, and he'll have full reports and pictures and all that stuff. So what I'm asking for is a supplemental budget for $25,000 for the remainder of this year.
And he's scheduled for August 26th.
August 26th, yes.
The other thing she just passed out.
So he's already scheduled?
Okay, so I would like to ask a consensus to bring a supplemental budget request for $25,000 for the Wheat Ridge Business District to continue their 2019 grants.
So that we have consensus on that to move forward.
And that's my last thing.
Okay. Additional elected officials matters, and I'll turn around. Do you have anything tonight?
I want to make one comment. This conversation that you had about the treasurer, I participated in a similar conversation about 25 years ago. And there was always this feeling of, well, what if some ignorant guy off the street ran for treasurer and got elected? And now, 20 years later, you're saying the same thing. And I just want to remind you, this is our 50th year, and I don't think we've ever had a bad treasurer. So you can...
Thank you.
Heck, you can have bad council people.
But we don't.
Now to business. This is the day that candidates can come in and pick up their packets for running for office. You have 20 days to get your signatures. The packet will include a petition, some stuff about the law, a finance packet for your reporting. And so just come on in. We're open at 8 o'clock, and Robin will be there.
Thank you. Any other elected officials matters? Mr. Matthews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of note, probably just people probably have maybe seen this reported elsewhere, but the flaggers are going to start coming offline along the G line. They say it's going to be phased out. We don't have that many crossings, but the flaggers will disappear. Hopefully the operators now are getting seasoned and maybe don't find a need to blow their horns quite as often as they have been in the past. And also, I'd like to talk to my folks up there at Ridge Road, north of the bottling plant. They're concerned about what's still going on there with noise from that new construction up there. And Mr. Goff did have a meeting with them today, and I would like to give him some time to if he
I
needs it to
give a quick update.
do some things. I don't want to put him on the spot. I just want to let them know that we are still actively working on it.
Yeah, no, it's a good venue. Real quickly, and I have an email drafted that's not quite done yet, waiting for Mr. Dahl, that I'll send out tomorrow with a bigger update for you all. But we did have a meeting this morning with the general manager who's retiring in 2 weeks, and the new general manager was there also. But the biggest thing that I want to report tonight is I requested that they, which they haven't done yet, is to put a letter together and send to the entire neighborhood. The city's going to provide them the addresses to send that to on what's going on, what their plans are, why this is happening, and just so that there's some communication. And that hasn't happened. I was surprised. I asked them that, and they said, no, we really haven't done that. I'll say, well, we'll get you the addresses. Please do that. And they said totally. They want to come to City Council, too, at a future study session as soon as we can get them scheduled to give an update of what's going on. Just real briefly, there was, they're doing a major renovation, a multi-year, multi-phased project, and they have a new piece of equipment that is an energy efficiency piece of equipment that helps with, it sucks, use my layman's terms, it sucks in air into the furnaces.
It sucks the oxygen out of the room and sticks it into the furnace.
And that piece of equipment is making a weird noise and a consistent noise, and it is. I've been up there. And we are getting some complaints, and so their board, Miller Coors board, is coming out, flying out on the August 14th. They're having a meeting, and one of the agenda items is to talk about this and to approve funding that's potentially going to be needed to fix it. So they are working on it. Unfortunately, it's taken longer than, if you have to live up there, you have to deal with this. But we're on them, and we have another meeting scheduled with them. Staff does on August 13th. So. And there potentially is, very quickly again, unfortunately, our code is very weak on how we deal with noise issues. It's very subjective. And the state has a much more objective code that actually measures decibel levels. And unfortunately, our code, an option for City Council is to adopt the state statute standards so that we can enforce it at those levels. Today, we can't enforce it at those levels. Today, it's more subjective, right? And it's based on if it's an annoyance to people, it's a noise issue, and we should enforce it. So it's very weak. So I would suggest that we tighten that part of our code up so that we can deal with these issues in a more efficient way.
Okay. Any additional public officials matters? Well, I will close with one thing. Tomorrow we will do a groundbreaking for the new hook ramps at Clear Creek Crossing at 10 o'clock. So if you're available to come and participate in that, that's great. And with that, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.